Beneath the endless gold of the Sahara, where silence stretches beyond the horizon and the wind erases memory, there once thrived kingdoms now lost to time. Their walls have crumbled into dunes, their rivers turned to dust. Yet faint whispers remain, carvings of forgotten kings, trade routes that end in emptiness, stone ruins half swallowed by the desert's drifting breath. Long before the Sahara became a wasteland, it was alive. A land of lakes, cities, and empires that flourished beneath a greener sky. Who were these desert lords who mastered the sands before the sands consumed them? Were they ancestors of known civilizations, or an entirely separate world, erased by climate and time alike? Today, only fragments tell their story. Fragments scattered like stars across a barren sea of dunes. But if we listen closely, the desert still speaks. Through ancient maps, lost legends, and buried monuments, a forgotten chapter of human history waits to be uncovered. This is the story of the lost kingdoms of the Sahara that vanished without a trace. Chapter 1. The Green Sahara, a forgotten world. There was a time when the Sahara was not a desert, not an endless sea of dunes and wind-sculpted silence, but a living, breathing world, a land of grasslands, rivers, and shallow lakes shimmering beneath a gentler sun. Today we call it the Green Sahara, a name that sounds almost mythical, like a dream half remembered. Yet this dream was real, stretching across thousands of years between 10,000 and 5,000 BCE. It was an epoch of abundance. Seasonal rains swept northward from the tropics, feeding lakes the size of small seas. Rivers that no longer exist carved valleys into what are now barren plateaus. Crocodiles and hippopotamuses wallowed in waters where today even the most resilient scorpion struggles to survive. Herds of gazelles grazed under acacia trees, and early humans, hunters, gatherers, and later herders, followed the rhythm of these ancient rains. Archaeologists call this the African humid period, but it might just as well be called the forgotten chapter of humanity's story, the time before the sands. The story begins not in myth, but in the cool precision of science. In the 1970s, core samples drilled from beneath the Sahara's surface revealed layers of ancient pollen, traces of vegetation that had once blanketed this desolation. Later, in the 1990s and 2000s, NASA's satellites confirmed it from orbit. Beneath the dunes lie the dry beds of rivers and the ghostly outlines of vanished lakes. Among them is the Tamanrasset River, a massive waterway that once flowed northward toward the Mediterranean, feeding fertile plains across modern-day Algeria and Mauritania. What the satellites saw from space, archaeologists began to uncover on the ground. At sites like Wadi Tanezuft in Libya, they found stone tools, hearths, and pottery fragments scattered along the banks of what were once flowing rivers. In the sediments, they found shells of freshwater snails, species that cannot survive in dry sand. The Sahara, it seemed, was not always a place of absence, and as the landscape blossomed, so too did its people. The human presence in the Green Sahara stretches deep into prehistory. At first they were hunters and foragers, moving with the herds that wandered through the open savannas. But over time, as the climate stabilized, their ways of life evolved. Archaeological evidence shows that by 7000 BCE, groups in what is now the Central Sahara began to domesticate cattle. They herded them across grassy plains, leaving behind engravings of longhorn bulls carved into rock faces that today lie hundreds of kilometers from the nearest vegetation. Some researchers describe this as the birth of pastoral culture in Africa, a way of life that would spread outward to shape civilizations far beyond the desert's edge. At Tassili in southeastern Algeria, thousands of rock paintings record these transformations in exquisite detail. Scenes of dancing, herding, swimming, and ritual fill the sandstone walls. To stand before them is to feel time collapse, to witness life unfold in a place where life should not exist. The images are so vivid that when the French explorer Henri Lot documented them in the 1950s, he called Tassili the greatest museum of prehistoric art in the world. And yet, these paintings are not mere decorations. They are memory made visible. They tell of animals long extinct in the region, giraffes, elephants, even ostriches. They speak of rivers wide enough to swim across, of communities stable enough to celebrate and mourn. But most haunting are the human figures. Some wear elaborate headdresses or appear to float, surrounded by dots and symbols. Others have strange round heads with no faces at all. Were these depictions of shamans in trance, gods of a forgotten faith, or visions of ancestors seen through ritual or dream? No one can say for sure. At the same time, another site was forming its own quiet mystery, Nabta Playa, deep in southern Egypt's desert near the Sudanese border. Here, archaeologists uncovered a vast basin that once held a seasonal lake. Surrounding it were stone circles, tumuli, and alignments that seemed to point to the stars. Radiocarbon dating placed them as early as 7000 BCE, older than Stonehenge, older even than the first pyramids. Some of the stones mark the summer solstice, aligning perfectly with the rising of the constellation Orion. To some scholars, this was humanity's first observatory, evidence that long before pharaohs or pyramids, desert peoples had learned to track the heavens. To others, it was simply a meeting ground, a ritual landscape where pastoral tribes gathered each year to honor the coming of rain. Either way, it shows that even at this early stage, the people of the Sahara were not primitive wanderers. They were builders, planners, and astronomers. They watched the stars because their survival depended on them, and perhaps, in watching the skies, they began to imagine gods. By 6000 BCE, the Sahara reached the height of its fertility. The monsoon rains were generous, and the desert bloomed into a mosaic of lakes and savannas. Archaeological evidence suggests increasing complexity, trade in stone tools and shells, settlements that endured through multiple generations, even rudimentary social hierarchies. Yet nothing lasts forever. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rains began to weaken. The same earth that had given this paradise began to reclaim it. By 5000 BCE, the lakes were shrinking. Dust storms became more frequent. The rivers that once sustained entire communities turned seasonal, then vanished altogether. To those who lived through it, the change must have felt like the wrath of the gods. At first, they adapted. The herders moved their flocks towards surviving water sources. Villages clustered around shrinking oases, but the desert's expansion was relentless. Within a few centuries, whole regions were abandoned. The people who had once painted on canyon walls and built stone circles beneath the stars began to migrate. To the Sahel, to the Nile Valley, to the highlands of Ethiopia. Some scholars believe these migrations seeded the great river civilizations of Africa, particularly Egypt. The skills of herding, stonework, and celestial observation, hallmarks of the early Nile culture, may trace their roots back to the forgotten peoples of the Green Sahara. In this way, the desert did not destroy them. It transformed them. Yet what the desert consumes, it also preserves. Buried beneath layers of sand lie fossilized riverbeds, pollen traces, and the remains of forgotten settlements. When archaeologists dig into these layers, they are not merely uncovering bones or pottery, they are listening to echoes. One such echo lies in the Ennedi Plateau of Chad, another treasure of ancient rock art. Here, across hundreds of canyons, carvings and paintings depict herds of cattle, chariots, and ceremonial scenes. The variety and age of these depictions suggest centuries of continuous habitation, long before the Sahara became the world's largest desert. But then, as the Green Sahara faded, so too did its memory. Oral traditions among the Tuareg, Fulani, and other desert peoples still speak of ancestors who lived in lands of water and grass. Some legends describe cities swallowed by sandstorms or drowned beneath inland seas. Perhaps these are only myths, or perhaps, through myth, memory survived where history did not. Chapter 2. Tassili Naja, the painted archives of a lost age high in the remote southeast of Algeria, where sandstone plateaus rise like the bones of an ancient world, lies Tassili Naja, a labyrinth of cliffs, canyons, and wind-carved stone that once looked upon a living Sahara. Today, the land is silent and skeletal, scorched beneath an unrelenting sun. But upon its weathered walls, the echoes of another age still endure, painted in ochre, carved in stone, and preserved by the breathless dryness of the desert itself. More than 15,000 images adorn these cliffs: giraffes, antelope, crocodiles, cattle, and human figures locked in scenes of movement and ceremony. It is a vision of the Sahara before it became desert, when rivers ran where now lie dunes, and savannas teemed with life. Each image is a window, not only into the environment of that time, but into the minds and beliefs of those who once called this place home. When French explorer Henri Lot arrived here in the 1950s, he was struck not just by the scale of the paintings, but by their humanity. The world's greatest museum of prehistoric art, he called it, a phrase that captured both wonder and disbelief. For these were not crude sketches left by nomads or wanderers. They were deliberate, layered, and symbolic, the product of generations who recorded their world with care and ritual purpose. Hote and his team spent years tracing and cataloguing the art, sleeping among the cliffs, surrounded each night by the faces of a vanished people. They saw processions of dancers painted in crimson and ochre, hunters armed with bows and spears, women in graceful posture, cattle with elaborate horns. Some images stretched meters across, as if to immortalize entire narratives in motion. The chronology of Tassili's paintings spans nearly 10,000 years, from the early Holocene to roughly the first millennium BCE. Archaeologists divide this immense canvas into periods: the round head phase, the pastoral period, the horse and camel periods, each reflecting a shift in climate, culture, and belief. The oldest works, the mysterious roundhead figures, date back nearly 9,000 years. They are unlike anything else in prehistoric art. Human-like beings with perfectly circular heads, featureless faces, and elongated limbs. Some float weightlessly, others appear to merge with strange geometric forms. One colossal painting, known as the Great God of Sephar, towers over 3 meters high, depicting a being with round eyes and outstretched arms surrounded by smaller figures in apparent worship. To some, these were visions of shamans in trance, depictions of altered states, where the boundary between human and spirit dissolved. Others see in them echoes of forgotten deities, ancestral myths, or cosmological symbols too old to decode. A few, outside mainstream academia, whisper of ancient visitations, extraterrestrial, divine, or something else entirely. Lahote himself was tempted by such speculation, noting that the Martian-like heads reminded him of visitors from another world. But within the discipline of archaeology, the prevailing interpretation is more human, and no less wondrous. The Roundhead period reflects a deeply spiritual culture, one that saw the world as alive with unseen forces. The featureless faces may represent beings beyond individuality, the ancestors, spirits, or personifications of nature. In this view, the vast plateau of Tassili was not merely a home, but a sanctuary, a place of vision and ritual communion. As time passed, the art shifted. Around 6,000 years ago, the Sahara entered its pastoral age. The people who once painted spirits and gods now depicted herds of cattle, men leading oxen, women milking goats, and communal dances around sacred fires. It was the dawn of domestication, and Tassili's artists recorded its arrival with exquisite detail. The animals are drawn with precision, muscular bodies, curved horns, even markings that suggest specific breeds. These pastoral scenes tell of abundance. Lakes and grasslands stretched across what is now desert, sustaining herders who may have traded with distant peoples. Pottery fragments, stone tools, and burial sites suggest a semi-settled life. The climate was generous and human culture flourished in harmony with the land. Yet even in these bucolic images, hints of ceremony persist. Dances with masks, processions before towering figures, gestures that echo earlier spiritual motifs. By around 4000 BCE, the rains began to falter. The Green Sahara was drying. Slowly, over centuries, the savanna retreated, and the desert began its long conquest. The art of Tassili mirrors this transformation. The cattle give way to horses, swift and mobile, ideal for survival on the shifting edge of aridity. Chariots appear, drawn by teams of steeds, racing across the walls in scenes of movement and control. These horse period paintings, dated to roughly 1500 BCE, suggest new hierarchies, perhaps chiefdoms or warrior elites, rising in response to a harsher world. Then, as the desert deepened, the camels came, the last phase of Tassili's art, marking adaptation to a landscape now nearly uninhabitable. The paintings grow smaller, simpler, more utilitarian. The grandeur fades, replaced by signs of survival. The desert had finally silenced the world that once spoke through color and stone. Yet even as the environment turned to dust, the memory of what once was endured upon the rock. And it is here that Tassili's mystery deepens, for despite the immense cultural record on its cliffs, archaeologists have found no major settlements nearby. No temples, no cities, no stone foundations to anchor the lives of its painters. The people of Tassili appear only in pigment and engraving, leaving no trace of where they lived, what they built, or how they vanished. Was Tassili a sacred site visited seasonally by nomadic artists, or did the plateau itself hold ceremonial importance? A pilgrimage destination for tribes across the ancient Sahara. Some researchers suggest it functioned like a temple complex under open sky, its rock faces serving as the walls of a vast natural cathedral. Each painting would then be not decoration, but devotion, an offering to the gods of rain, fertility, or time. In the 21st century, new technology has begun to peel back the layers of Tassili's enigma. Satellite imagery and paleoclimate studies confirm that the region once lay along ancient river systems, arteries that could have supported life for thousands of years. Recent digital surveys by Algerian and international teams have identified previously unrecorded sites, some deep within remote canyons accessible only by drone. These efforts hint at the possibility that entire chapters of Sahara prehistory remain buried beneath dunes or sealed within inaccessible cliffs. And yet, for all the data and debate, the essence of Tassili remains poetic. The faces that look down from its walls are not merely artistic, they are temporal. They stare across 10,000 years, through climate shifts, through human forgetfulness, through the birth and death of civilizations. They remind us that history is not always written in words or stone, but in the act of seeing, the urge to remember. There is also a silence within Tassili, a sense that the paintings were not just expression, but preservation, a record made in anticipation of loss. Perhaps these people knew their world was changing. Perhaps, as the rains failed and the rivers shrank, they sought to fix their memories in color, so that even if their bodies and homes vanished, their vision would remain. In that sense, Tassili Naja is not just an archive of art. It is an act of defiance against time. Today, only the wind moves freely here. Tourists are rare. The plateau is difficult to reach, requiring days of travel across one of Earth's harshest terrains. Yet those who stand among its painted stones describe a strange calm, a feeling of being watched, not by spirits or gods, but by memory itself. In the fading light of evening, when shadows stretch across the cliffs, the figures seem to shift, as if the dancers might resume their ancient steps, as if the round-headed beings might open their eyes once more. And in that quiet illusion, the past breathes again. Tassili Naja remains the Sahara's greatest paradox, a monument without walls, a civilization without ruins, a story told entirely in silence. It is both an end and a beginning, a reminder that before the desert claimed this land, there was life, art, and wonder beyond imagining. And somewhere within those painted echoes, the first chapter of the Sahara's Lost Kingdoms still waits to be understood. Chapter 3. Nabta Playa, Egypt's Forgotten. Precursor beneath the endless sky of Egypt's southern desert, where the horizon seems to dissolve into light and silence, there once shimmered a great lake. Today, it is only a hollow in the sand, a dry basin called Nabta Playa. Yet buried beneath its surface lies one of the oldest ceremonial landscapes ever discovered. Long before the pharaohs carved their names into stone, long before the Nile became Egypt's lifeline, the people of Nabta had already begun to align their lives, and their monuments, with the stars. The discovery came quietly. In the 1970s, a team of archaeologists, led by Fred Wendorf and Romuald Schild, were surveying the vast emptiness of the Nubian desert when they stumbled upon something that should not have been there. Clusters of stones arranged in deliberate circles, upright slabs pointing toward the cardinal directions, and burial tumuli containing the remains of cattle. These were not the traces of mere nomads. They were the first whispers of an organized, symbolic society. A civilization emerging not from the fertile banks of the Nile, but from the arid edge of the Sahara itself. Radiocarbon dating revealed a stunning truth. The earliest layers of Nabta Playa stretch back to nearly 7,000 BCE, at a time when the desert was not yet a desert, but a savanna of grass and water. Monsoon rains had once nourished this land, filling its playa, the shallow lake, for part of each year. Nomadic herders, likely of sub-Saharan origin, gathered here with their cattle, their food, and their stories, and over time, their gatherings evolved into something sacred. The earliest stone arrangements were modest: small hearths, cooking pits, and animal enclosures. But by 5500 BCE, the people of Nabta were building on a scale that defied their environment. They erected megaliths, slabs of sandstone hauled from distant quarries, some weighing several tons, set upright in careful alignments. These stones were oriented to the rising of particular stars, including those of Orion's belt, a constellation that would later become central to Egyptian cosmology. Archaeoastronomers have shown that the main stone circle at Nabta Playa may have marked the summer solstice, signaling the time when the monsoon rains would return. This was not simply a practical calendar for survival. It was a cosmological act, a dialogue between earth and sky. By embedding celestial order into stone, the people of Nabta had begun to encode the rhythms of the universe into their world. It is a breathtaking thought that thousands of years before the Great Pyramid, shepherds in a forgotten lakebed were already tracking the heavens with mathematical precision. Their monuments stood not for kings or gods, but for balance, for the eternal dance between the sky's constancy and the desert's fragility. Among the most haunting discoveries at Nabta are the cattle burials. In stone-lined pits, archaeologists found the remains of domesticated cattle, sometimes accompanied by small offerings. To these ancient herders, cattle were more than sustenance. They were sacred beings, embodiments of life itself. In later Egyptian religion, the cow would appear as Hathor, the celestial mother, the nourisher of the dead. It is difficult not to sense a deep continuity here, a bridge of symbolism stretching from Nabta's windswept stones to the temples of Thebes and the tombs of Giza. Some researchers believe these early desert people were the direct ancestors of the Nile, valley farmers who, centuries later, would build the first dynasties. As the Sahara began to dry around 5000 BCE, the lake at Nabta shrank and vanished. The people who had once gathered around its shores were forced to migrate eastward, toward the fertile Nile. They carried with them the memory of celestial order, of sacred cattle, of stone and star united in ritual. When the Nile's early villages appeared soon after, they bore traces of the same symbolic language. The orientation of tombs, the solar alignments of shrines, even the early forms of ritual sacrifice, all echo faintly of Nabta Playa's vanished ceremonies. It is as if Egypt's civilization did not begin along the Nile, but arrived there already mature, already guided by the heavens. The desert, however, keeps its secrets well. The stones at Nabta tell us little of their makers. No pottery inscriptions, no carvings, no human burials have been found to speak their names. What survives is geometry, pure, silent geometry, drawn across the sand in perfect relationship to the sky. It is as if the builders spoke the language of astronomy before they spoke the language of writing. Modern instruments have confirmed what the eye alone could never see. The megalith's alignments are not random. The circle's outer stones track the movement of the Tropic of Cancer and the solstice sunrise. Others point toward Orion's belt, the celestial hunter whose rising in the pre-dawn sky once heralded the coming flood of the Nile. To the people of Nabta, the heavens were a clock, a prophecy, and perhaps even a promise. Some researchers have gone further, suggesting that Nabta Playa represents the world's earliest known astronomical observatory, predating Stonehenge by nearly 2,000 years. If so, this would place Egypt, not Britain, at the origin of megalithic science. Others urge caution, arguing that the alignments might be coincidental, or that the builder's intent cannot be known. Yet the sheer consistency of orientation, the deliberate shaping of space, and the ritual context make coincidence difficult to believe. Standing in that desert today, the stones seem small against the vast horizon, but if one listens, if one allows the silence to stretch long enough, it is possible to imagine the world as it was. The lake glistening under the solstice sun, the lowing of cattle, the rhythmic clatter of stone against stone as new monuments rise, night falling, stars mirrored in the water, and a people looking upward, marking time not by the turning of seasons, but by the slow procession of the heavens themselves. In that darkness, the line between science and religion may never have existed. Observation was worship. The cosmos was alive, its patterns divine. The builders of Nabta were mapping not only the stars, but their own place within the great cycle. A world view that would echo later in Egypt's creation myths, where the universe itself was born from the waters of chaos, and the first mound of earth rose, just as Nabta once rose from its ancient lakebed, and yet, for all its grandeur, Nabta Playa fell silent. Around 4800 BCE, as the rains failed and the climate shifted, the site was abandoned. The herders moved on, perhaps following the retreating water to the Nile. The stones remained, solitary markers of a world turning to dust. Centuries later, when Egyptian priests spoke of the first time, the Zep Tepi, when gods walked the earth and the stars guided men, they may have been recalling something very old, a memory carried across generations from the desert itself. Today, the site lies under an indifferent sky, its stones half buried in the sand. Few travelers ever reach it. There are no grand temples, no hieroglyphs, no golden relics, only the whisper of wind through ancient geometry. But in that simplicity lies something profound, the first spark of cosmic awareness, the earliest attempt to bring the heavens down to earth. The story of Nabta Playa reminds us that civilization did not erupt suddenly along the Nile. It unfolded slowly, like dawn spreading across the desert, from west to east, from water to river, from silence to language. Its first architects were not kings but herders, not scribes but sky watchers. They lived in a world where survival depended on the ability to read the stars, and where the act of aligning a stone could bind heaven and earth together. And perhaps, when the last monsoon fell, they looked once more to the horizon, to the rising belt of Orion, and saw in its steady glow the memory of their gods, their ancestors, and the promise of renewal somewhere beyond the sands. The desert would bury their world, but the stars, the same stars they once tracked so faithfully, still rise over Nabta Playa. They shine down on their forgotten circle, on the bones of sacred cattle, on the empty basin that was once a lake. And in that silence, under the same eternal sky, the question lingers, not of how they built it, but of what they knew, and how much of it still sleeps beneath the sands of time. The stones remain, watching, waiting, whispering of a world before Egypt, a world that remembered the stars. Chapter 4. The cattle cult of the Sahara across the wind-scoured expanse of the Central Sahara. The bones of an ancient world lie silent, but upon the dark desert rock, etched with precision thousands of years ago, another voice still speaks. It is the voice of herders, priests, and forgotten kings, carved in scenes of cattle parades and sacred processions. Long before Egypt raised temples to Hathor, the cow goddess of love and fertility, the desert itself was already a vast shrine to the sacred bull. At the heart of this mystery lies a belief system so old, its origins disappear into the mirage of prehistory. Archaeologists call it the cattle cult, a phrase too small to contain what it truly meant to the people who lived it. For them, the cow was not just sustenance, it was ancestry, spirit, and power. It was the bridge between earth and sky, between hunger and holiness. Today, when we imagine the Sahara, we see endless dunes, a kingdom of thirst. Yet this same land, 10,000 years ago, was green. Rain fell, rivers flowed, vast savannas spread across what is now barren sand. In this green Sahara, life flourished. Hippos in the shallows, giraffes on the plains, and humans carving their stories in the stone. It was here, in the valleys of Tassili and the plateaus of Mesak Setefet, that the cult of cattle took root. Thousands of engravings have been found across this ancient landscape. The walls of shelters and cliffs are alive with movement, not of hunters, but of herders. Men and women lead long-horned bulls through what appear to be ritual scenes. Some figures are masked or adorned with elaborate headdresses. Others raise their hands to the heavens as if in invocation. In some panels, cattle are drawn larger than humans, their horns stretching skyward like crescents of the moon. These were not mere records of daily life. They were acts of devotion. Archaeologists studying the Mesak Plateau in modern-day Libya have catalogued over 30,000 rock engravings, many of them centered around cattle. The sheer scale of this imagery suggests a complex worldview, one where domesticated animals were intertwined with cosmic order. Carbon dating places many of these works between 7,000 and 5,000 BCE, a time when the Sahara was slowly drying and human communities turned inward to preserve what they could. To these pastoral peoples, cattle were more than a source of milk or meat. They were living vessels of vitality, wealth that walked, blood that nourished, spirit that endured. Cattle herding shaped their identity, their myths, and even their funerary rites. Some burials have been found accompanied by the horns or skulls of bulls, suggesting offerings or symbolic guardianship into the afterlife. In the caves of Wadi Jarat, near the borders of Algeria and Niger, the repetition of horned motifs hints at an early theology, one not yet codified in temples, but alive in memory and art. The veneration of the cow predates the Egyptian dynasties by millennia, yet the echoes are unmistakable. When the ancient Egyptians later worshipped Hathor, the goddess often depicted as a cow or a woman with bovine horns, they were perhaps inheriting a memory older than their own civilization. Some Egyptologists believe that the pastoral ancestors who migrated from the once Green Sahara into the Nile Valley carried with them their sacred symbols and rituals. The cow that once symbolized life in the desert became the celestial mother in Egyptian myth, she who gives birth to the sky. In this way, the cattle cult may not have vanished at all. It transformed, surviving as belief flowed eastward with the herders who fled the encroaching sands. The drying of the Sahara, known as the Holocene aridification, was one of the great turning points in human history. As rains failed and the grasslands turned to dust, entire cultures were displaced. But ideas, like rivers, have a way of finding new channels. The symbols of the cow, the bull, the horn, reappear again and again along humanity's great migration routes from the Sahara to the Nile, and beyond to the Horn of Africa. Among the Dinka and Nuer of modern South Sudan, cattle remain central to life, status, and spirituality. A man's worth is measured by his herd. Marriage, feasts, and funerals revolve around the giving and sacrifice of cattle. Some still anoint themselves with cattle dung and ash, painting their skin with patterns that mirror the sacred markings of their animals. To these Nilotic tribes, the cow is a divine intermediary, a remnant of the same worldview that once animated the Sahara. If the Sahara's lost herders were the ancestors of these traditions, their faith may have been the earliest pastoral religion in Africa, perhaps even the world. A system of belief where the cycle of rain and drought, fertility and death was mirrored in the care and sacrifice of cattle. In some engravings, bulls are shown pierced or bound, suggesting rituals of offering, acts of renewal, not destruction. Blood, it seems, was not only life, but also communication with the unseen. The stones of Mesak Setafet and Tassili Nadja whisper of ceremonies lost to time. Perhaps there were chants sung to the rising moon. Perhaps the people gathered at certain times of year to bless their herds and call back the rains. These gatherings, etched in stone, may represent the earliest organized communal rites, precursors to later temple festivals across North Africa and Egypt. But if the cattle cult was so widespread, what became of its people? As the climate shifted around 5000 BCE, the once fertile Sahara began its slow death. Waterholes vanished, grasses turned brittle, herds dwindled. Some communities may have retreated into highlands and oases, clinging to what little sustenance remained. Others migrated toward the Nile, joining and transforming into the first pre-dynastic cultures of Upper Egypt, Nakada, Badari, Tassian, societies that show clear signs of pastoral heritage. The desert, in this sense, did not bury the cattle cult. It scattered it, like seeds carried on the wind. Even today, traces of that lost reverence persist in symbols both sacred and mundane. The crescent horns that crown Hathor, the bull-headed Apis of Memphis, the celestial cows painted inside Egyptian tombs, all are descendants of the same ancient imagery carved into Saharan stone. Across millennia, the message endures. Life flows from the herd. Divinity flows from life, and yet, something remains unspoken in these carvings, something beyond domestication or survival. The precision, the symmetry, the care with which each bull is rendered, these are not the works of a people simply recording their daily labor. They are testaments. Each engraving, each horn curve is a kind of prayer, one meant to last through sandstorms and centuries. Perhaps the cattle themselves were seen as ancestors, as intermediaries between humans and the great unknowable. In some ways, this Saharan faith mirrors other ancient mysteries, the bull cults of Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, the Minoan bull leapers of Crete, the golden calves of Canaan. Across continents, the bull seems to carry a shared human reverence, a symbol of strength, virility, and divine presence. Could all these echoes trace back to the same origin? A belief born not in temples, but in the open savannas of a fertile Sahara. Archaeologists tread carefully around such questions. The evidence is scattered, weathered, and fragmentary. Stone can tell us what was seen, but not always what was meant. Still, patterns emerge, patterns too consistent to ignore. The earliest cattle remains found in Nabta Playa, near Egypt's southern border, show evidence of deliberate burial, dated to around 6000 BCE. There, small stone circles align with celestial events, suggesting a ritual calendar linked to the stars and to cattle. It is as though the heavens themselves were part of the herd. When we piece these fragments together, an image forms of a people who saw no separation between nature and the divine, between their animals and their gods. The bull's bellow was thunder, its milk a gift from the earth, its death a sacrifice that renewed the balance of life. To them, cattle were the pulse of existence, the embodiment of continuity against a landscape that could turn hostile without warning. And then, silence. The rains ceased. The stones grew cold. The herds moved on, or perished. The priests of the cattle faded into memory. What remains are the etchings, ghosts of a faith that once defined an entire world. When the wind moves across the Mesak Plateau, it sounds almost like breath, as if the desert still remembers. Beneath the dust, perhaps the bones of a sacred bull lie still, its horns pointing upward toward the same stars its keepers once worshipped. The cult is gone. The desert is empty, and yet, in the endless quiet, you can almost hear the lowing of distant cattle, echoing across 10,000 years, calling back to a time when the Sahara was alive. Their faith was carved into stone. Ours perhaps was carved from forgetting. Chapter 5. The Lost Cities. Beneath the dunes, beneath the endless waves of the Sahara, where the horizon blurs into heat and dust, there lies another world, a world of stone and silence, buried beneath thousands of years of shifting dunes. Today, satellite eyes pierce through the golden veil. From far above the earth, faint geometric scars emerge, lines, circles, and grids, almost too symmetrical to be natural. These spectral traces stretch across the Libyan Fezzan, curl through the Tanez-roofed basin, and fade toward the Tibesti Mountains. To the untrained eye, they are nothing. To the archaeologist, they whisper of cities once alive, roads once trodden, wells once brimming with life. Modern radar imaging, capable of seeing through sand, has begun to map what the desert has long hidden. In places, it detects buried walls running for kilometers, the ghostly remains of irrigation channels, and the faint outlines of square compounds, signs of settlement in a land now utterly inhospitable. In others, faint depressions trace forgotten caravan routes, the arteries that once connected the heart of Africa to the shores of the Mediterranean. The Sahara was not always desert. Around 12,000 years ago, it was a green world, a vast savanna teeming with rivers, lakes, and forests. Hippos wallowed in its waters. Crocodiles basked under its sun. Nomadic herders and fishermen thrived along its banks. As the climate shifted and the rains retreated, the green world began to die. Lakes evaporated into dust. The people moved, or they vanished. What remained was buried beneath sand. But in the heart of that desolation, something survived longer than it should have. The Garamantes, Greek historians like Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, spoke of them with awe and confusion. He described a mysterious people living deep in the desert, a nation of great wealth and cunning, who harnessed chariots to 4-horse teams and hunted the Ethiopians who dwell in the sands. For centuries, scholars dismissed his tales as exaggeration, a mirage conjured from rumor, but the sands, as they often do, proved him right. In the mid-20th century, archaeologists rediscovered Jerma, the capital of the Garamantes. What they unearthed changed the map of ancient Africa. Beneath the dunes lay stone houses, burial tombs, and fragments of pottery dating back to at least 500 BCE. But deeper still, beneath the Garamantian layers, older structures emerged, walls and irrigation channels from a time before recorded history. These channels, known as fogara, were feats of engineering that rivaled Rome's aqueducts. They drew water from hidden aquifers deep below the desert floor, feeding gardens and crops across miles of sand. From the air, their collapsed tunnels form long, dark scars, proof that the Garamantes had once turned desert into farmland. For nearly 1,000 years, they ruled from the heart of the Sahara, trading salt, gold, and slaves along vast routes that reached as far as the Mediterranean coast. Roman merchants coveted their goods. Carthaginian scouts recorded their existence. And yet, their empire fell, not by conquest, but by thirst. When the underground aquifers dried, their lifelines vanished. The people scattered, their cities abandoned to the dunes. But the Garamantes may not have been the first. Beneath their ruins, deeper strata suggest even older settlements. Foundations eroded beyond recognition. Radiocarbon dating from nearby sites in the Fezzan points to human habitation as far back as 6000 BCE, during the last humid phase of the Sahara. Archaeologists found rock art depicting cattle, giraffes, and even swimmers, evidence of a land that once knew rivers and rain. Some of these images lie far from any known Garamantian site. Could they mark a civilization that flourished and fell before the Garamantes ever rose? Satellite scans reveal more questions than answers. In the Tenerife Basin, one of the most lifeless regions on Earth, radar imaging from the European Space Agency detected faint grid-like anomalies. Square plots too regular to be natural formations. Similar patterns appear near the Kufra oasis and beneath the Merzuk dunes. Archaeologists debate their meaning. Are they remnants of ancient fields, caravan stations, or entire buried towns? Old maps, too, hint at forgotten cities. Roman geographers spoke of Zala, Sidamus, and debris, trading centers that vanished from history without a trace. Even Ptolemy's 2nd century charts place settlements deep within the desert, in locations now utterly barren. Later, Islamic sources told of lost lands of brass and bones, where caravans disappeared chasing phantom cities glimmering in the heat. Some explorers have claimed to find them. In 1933, British pilot Sir Percy Maitland flew over the Libyan desert and photographed strange dark spots stretching in patterns beneath the sand. They appeared to form roads, even walls. Later expeditions tried to locate them on the ground, but shifting dunes had already erased the path. The desert conceals with purpose. Its winds erase footprints within minutes. Its dunes migrate like waves, swallowing entire landscapes. The ruins of a city could lie 10 meters below the surface and never break the crust. For archaeologists, excavation here is almost impossible. Every movement of sand reveals one secret while burying another. And yet, technology offers new hope. Synthetic aperture radar, multispectral imaging, and LiDAR scanning, tools once reserved for military reconnaissance, now turn their gaze toward prehistory. These instruments detect subtle differences in soil density, moisture, and mineral reflection, clues invisible to the human eye. In some regions of Fezzan, radar surveys have traced hundreds of subterranean Foggara tunnels, forming networks more intricate than any medieval aqueduct system. In others, square patterns the size of small villages emerge beneath dunes that have lain untouched for millennia. What were these places? Outposts of the Garamantes, or fragments of an older civilization swallowed by desertification long before history began? There are myths, of course. Local Tuareg legends speak of Tifinagh cities, named for the ancient Berber script. They tell of shining towns that once stood where now only sand remains, of kings who commanded rivers that flowed beneath the earth, and of storms sent by the gods to bury their pride. Some say the Garamantes themselves were not the builders, but the inheritors, descendants of a people who mastered the desert long before memory. Archaeologists tread carefully between legend and evidence, but the coincidences are striking. The Garamantes' irrigation methods appear suddenly advanced, with no clear developmental precursor. Their architecture, though adapted to desert life, shows hints of earlier design traditions. Could they have revived techniques from an earlier, forgotten era, handed down like whispers through generations? Each grain of sand in the Sahara is a page in a lost book. Beneath the dunes lie cities, and beneath those cities, others still. The desert is not a void. It is a layered archive, each storm rearranging the pages of time. In 2011, an international team using satellite data from NASA's Shuttle Radar Topography mission identified over 100 possible archaeological sites in the Libyan desert alone. Fortified compounds, road networks, and possible burial complexes. Yet political instability and environmental challenges have halted most excavations. What lies beneath remains beyond reach, protected by the same silence that has preserved it for thousands of years. It is a strange paradox. The Sahara, the world's largest desert, might also be the keeper of its oldest cities. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the less certain they become of where history truly begins. Because if these buried geometries do not belong to the Garamantes, if they predate even the first pharaohs of Egypt, then we must confront a possibility long dismissed, that civilization's roots run far deeper and far older than our textbooks allow. Perhaps the Sahara was not always a graveyard. Perhaps it was once a cradle. Tonight, as the desert wind whispers across the dunes, it carries with it the faint echo of stone collapsing, of forgotten prayers beneath an alien sky. Somewhere below, beneath kilometers of sand, ancient walls still stand in darkness, mute, waiting for the day when the desert itself grows tired of hiding. And when that day comes, what story will it tell? Chapter 6. The Garamantes, lords of the central Sahara in the heart of the Sahara, where the land seems lifeless and the air burns with silence, once lay an empire that defied the desert itself. The Garamantes, mysterious, ingenious, and nearly forgotten, rose from the sands of the Fezzan basin in what is now southwestern Libya. To the Romans, they were little more than desert raiders, swift, elusive horsemen who vanished into the dunes as suddenly as they struck. But beneath the desert's austere facade, the truth tells a different story. This was no nomadic tribe. It was a civilization, an empire that carved cities, farms, and tombs out of one of the harshest landscapes on earth. The story of the Garamantes begins around 500 BCE, at a time when Carthage was expanding across North Africa's coast and Greek colonies dotted the Mediterranean deep inland beyond the known maps. A people were mastering the desert. They built their capital at Garama, modern-day Jerma, a place that once shimmered with palm groves, mud brick towers, and markets humming with traders from distant lands. Roman travelers, reaching its gates centuries later, would describe a city of thousands, its people proud and independent, their horses swift as the desert wind. How could such a society flourish here, where rain almost never fell, and summer temperatures scorched beyond endurance? The answer lay underground. Beneath the sand, the Garamantes built a hidden network of life, an astonishing system of subterranean tunnels known as qanats. These were long, sloping channels cut by hand through limestone and gravel, stretching for miles beneath the desert floor. They tapped ancient fossil aquifers, vast buried lakes of water left from a greener age, long before the Sahara turned to dust. From these hidden rivers, the Garamantes drew sustenance, feeding an oasis world unseen by the outside world. Fields of barley and wheat spread in neat rectangles. Orchards of dates and pomegranates flourished under the blazing sun. Archaeologist David Mattingly, who led decades of excavations across Fezzan, described the system as an underground empire of water, a triumph of engineering born from necessity. Each qanat began with a mother well, sometimes plunging more than 30 meters deep. From there, a sloping tunnel carried water gently downhill, surfacing at the heart of Garamante settlements. Dozens of vertical shafts punctuated the desert at regular intervals, like a trail of breath holes for the civilization below. These vertical access points allowed workers to dig, repair, and clean the channels. In total, the network stretched hundreds of kilometers, comparable in scale to Roman aqueducts or the irrigation systems of ancient Persia. Yet the Garamantes accomplished this without iron tools, without beasts of burden, relying solely on human labor and an intimate knowledge of the land's hidden geology. For centuries, their cities thrived. Jerma was joined by hundreds of smaller settlements scattered across the Fezzan, each surrounded by fields nourished by the underground veins of water. In the nearby valleys, necropolises were carved from stone and sand, rows of tombs, their entrances marked with upright slabs. Archaeologists unearthed grave goods, pottery, jewelry, tools, and glass beads from distant lands. These items revealed something extraordinary. Garamante society was not isolated. It was connected, part of a vast web of trade that linked the Mediterranean to sub-Saharan Africa. Carthaginian merchants brought fine ceramics and olive oil. Egyptian traders carried glass and linen. From the south came gold, ivory, and slaves. The Garamantes stood at the crossroads of continents, their desert kingdom a silent mediator between worlds. Roman chroniclers, including Herodotus and later Pliny the Elder, mentioned them in passing, always as enigmatic figures. Herodotus called them a great nation, dwelling deep in the desert, hunting the Ethiopian troglodytes with four-horse chariots. To the Romans, these desert charioteers were both a nuisance and a fascination. They raided Roman outposts along the frontier of Tripolitania, disappearing before the legions could strike back. But they also traded willingly, sending caravans north loaded with salt, dates, and captives, and returning with Mediterranean goods. For the empire, the Garamantes were both threat and partner, a paradox in the sand. As archaeologists began to uncover the truth of their world in the late 20th century, the image of the Garamantes shifted dramatically. They were not barbaric raiders, but urban pioneers, builders of cities, inventors of infrastructure, and masters of desert ecology. At its peak, their population may have reached 100,000. Their architecture included multi-story mud brick buildings, fortified compounds, and complex storage facilities for grain and water. In Germa, remains of city walls and public courtyards still rise from the sand, their outlines whispering of a vanished vitality. From the air, the Fezzan appears dotted with faint circles and lines, ancient field systems and Qanat routes, now dry and forgotten. Each one a vein in the body of a civilization that once pulsed with life. But like all empires born from fragile balance, the Garamantes were bound to their resource, water. The fossil aquifers they tapped were not renewable. Unlike rivers that flow with seasonal rains, these underground seas were remnants of an age when the Sahara was green, 10,000 years earlier. Each year, the Garamantes drew from a source that would never refill. Slowly, silently, their wells began to fail. Fields turned to dust. The Qanats ran dry, and the empire began to fade. By the 5th century CE, the once great cities of Fezzan were abandoned. The people scattered, some north toward Tripolitania, others deeper into the desert. Their language vanished. Their script, if they had one, left no trace. Even their name became uncertain. In Arabic sources of the Middle Ages, echoes remain. References to the Garam, or the lost people of the sands. Yet by then, they were memory, absorbed into legend, their ingenuity buried beneath centuries of silence. When modern explorers rediscovered Germa in the 19th century, the ruins seemed impossibly ancient. Early travelers spoke of crumbling walls half buried in dunes, fragments of pottery glinting in the sunlight, and the faint trace of streets winding through desolation. Only in the 1960s did systematic archaeology begin to peel back the layers. Teams from Britain and Libya, later joined by David Mattingly's work from the 1990s onward, used satellite imaging, aerial photography, and ground surveys to reveal a complex landscape of human adaptation. They found Qanat shafts stretching in lines across kilometers of desert, each one still perfectly aligned. In some, water could still be heard trickling faintly in the dark. Mattingly called it a civilization that engineered its own miracle and its own demise. The Garamantes challenge our understanding of what the Sahara once was. They are proof that the desert was never empty, that it has long been a stage for human ambition, innovation, and tragedy. Their story is not just about survival. It's about mastery, how humans can bend even the harshest environment to their will, but only for a time. When the balance breaks, when the last well dries, even the most ingenious society must yield to the sands. Today, the ruins of Germa rest beneath the relentless sun. Half buried, half reclaimed by wind and time, satellite scans reveal more Qanats still hidden beneath the dunes, their paths leading to lost farms and forgotten towns. Each shaft, each channel, is a relic of a vanished order, a whisper of a people who turned the desert into their home, only to be consumed by it. Some locals still tell stories of underground tunnels that stretch to the horizon, of spirits that guard the old wells, of voices echoing in the earth when the wind is right. Perhaps memory, too, flows like water, disappearing beneath the surface, waiting for someone to listen. The Garamantes remind us that the Sahara was once a cradle, not a tomb, and perhaps beneath other dunes, other forgotten kingdoms sleep, waiting to be found. For in every empire that fades, there remains a trace, a ruin, a legend, a silence that still speaks. And in that silence, we are left to wonder, how many more civilizations lie buried beneath the sands, their stories erased not by conquest, but by the slow, patient hand of the desert itself. The wind shifts, the dunes move, and somewhere, beneath the endless horizon, the Qanats still breathe faintly in the dark. Chapter 7. The underground waterways of the Fezzan beneath the blazing silence of the central Sahara lies a hidden labyrinth, an ancient network of tunnels carved through bedrock, reaching far beyond the sight of the sun. These are the Foggara, the lifelines of the Garamantes, a desert civilization that flourished where no one should have. Their existence defies the imagination. Hundreds of underground channels stretching for tens of kilometers beneath dunes and stone, engineered more than 2,000 years ago in one of the driest regions on Earth. The Fezzan, in southwestern Libya, was the Garamantes' homeland, a basin of shifting sands and rocky plateaus, framed by mountains that trap heat like a furnace. On the surface, it appears lifeless. Yet deep below, the Garamantes discovered an ancient gift. Fossil water trapped in aquifers since the last Green Sahara thousands of years before. From that hidden ocean, they drew the pulse that gave rise to a kingdom. To understand the Foggara is to glimpse how human ingenuity bends the impossible into survival. Each Foggara, or Qanat, began as a mother well, sunk deep into the aquifer until it reached the cool, pressurized water below. From there, a tunnel was dug at a gentle gradient, sloping downward toward fields and settlements. Along its length, vertical shafts were cut at intervals, sometimes every 20 or 30 meters, both to provide ventilation and to haul out the excavated stone. From above, these shafts appear like an endless string of dots across the desert floor, stretching toward the horizon. From below, they form a subterranean artery, dark, narrow, humid, and astonishingly precise. The Garamantes carved these by hand through layers of limestone and sandstone, using only copper or bronze tools. The result was an invisible miracle, water flowing silently under the desert, day and night, shielded from evaporation, guided by gravity alone. When archaeologists first identified the Foggara system in the mid-20th century, they were baffled. In aerial photographs, the lines of shafts looked like ancient roads or fortifications. Only later, when researchers descended into the collapsed sections, did the truth emerge. At sites like Jama, ancient Garama, Wadi al-Ajal, and Zinkekra, hundreds of Foggara converge, a hidden infrastructure supporting thousands of people. Each one could extend for up to 30 kilometers. Together, they formed a web spanning hundreds of square kilometers, transforming the Fezzan from barren desert into an oasis kingdom. At the system's heart lay Garama, the Garamantian capital. Once surrounded by palm groves and irrigated fields, it stood as a testament to the power of water mastery. Archaeological excavations have uncovered houses, courtyards, cemeteries, and even inscriptions, all signs of a settled, complex society deep within the desert's core. Roman geographers, awed and confounded, described the Garamantes as a people who live beneath the sands and bring water from the depths of the earth. The Garamantes did not invent the Qanat principle. The idea likely originated in ancient Persia around the 1st millennium BCE, but they perfected it for the Sahara. Their version adapted to the unique hydrology of the Fezzan, drawing from fossil aquifers sealed since the African humid period. This water was not replenished by rain. It was a finite inheritance from a greener age. Maintaining such a system required extraordinary discipline. Each Foggara demanded constant attention. Sand had to be cleared, shafts reinforced, and flow rates monitored. Without maintenance, tunnels collapsed or clogged with sediment. The Garamantes developed specialized workers for this, crews who descended into the darkness to keep the lifelines open. Some scholars suggest they used enslaved labor captured during desert raids. Others, that it was communal work tied to religious duty. Either way, these tunnels were sacred. They were the veins of their civilization. From above ground, the results must have seemed like a miracle. Palm trees lined irrigation channels. Wheat, barley, and dates grew in the shadow of dunes. Trade caravans arrived to rest in the shaded groves before continuing toward the Mediterranean or sub-Saharan Africa. The Garamantes exported salt, slaves, and semi-precious stones. They imported glassware and ceramics from the Roman world. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder called them barbarians of the sands. Yet the archaeological record tells a different story. The Garamantes built multi-roomed homes, constructed fortified compounds, and developed a writing system possibly derived from the Libyco-Berber script. They were not nomads. They were city dwellers, engineers, and traders who carved permanence out of impermanence. Their success, however, rested entirely on an invisible foundation, the Foggara. Satellite imagery in recent decades has revealed the true scale of their achievement. From orbit, faint ridges and dot-like depressions trace lines across the desert like veins beneath translucent skin. These are the collapsed remnants of ancient Foggara tunnels, thousands of them, forming an interconnected hydrological network that once sustained the Fezzan's population. Infrared, imaging and ground-penetrating radar have confirmed what no ancient chronicler could have imagined. The Garamantes, water systems extended far beyond their known cities, connecting distant valleys and forgotten oases. The Fezzan, once thought an isolated frontier, was in truth a pulsating landscape of human adaptation. But the same science that reveals this grandeur also exposes its fragility. The Foggara drew from non-renewable aquifers, underground reserves left over from the last wet phase of the Sahara, tens of thousands of years ago. Once drained, they could not refill. By the 3rd century CE, the signs of decline were already visible. The climate had begun to shift again. Rains became rarer. The fossil aquifers, never replenished, began to drop. As the water tables sank deeper, Foggara after Foggara fell silent. Some collapsed from neglect. Others simply ran dry. Without water, the fields withered and the oases shrank. The once prosperous Garamantian towns emptied. Archaeologists estimate that maintaining just one large Foggara system required the labor of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of workers. When the Garamantes' economy weakened, their ability to sustain that effort vanished. The desert took back its own. When European explorers stumbled upon the Fezzan in the 19th century, they found only ruins, crumbling walls buried in sand, and faint rows of depressions running across the plains. At first, no one understood what they were. Only with aerial photography in the 20th century did the pattern emerge, a revelation that redrew our understanding of desert civilization. The Garamantes' fall is a cautionary tale written in stone and silence. Their ingenuity extended the life of a world that nature had already abandoned, but only for a time. The Foggara gave them power, trade, and prestige, but it also tethered them to a resource that could never last. And yet, even in collapse, their legacy endures. The principle of the Foggara, transporting water underground to prevent evaporation, survived across centuries. Variations of the same technology are still used in Iran, Oman, and parts of North Africa today. Modern engineers marvel at the precision of the Garamantes' work. Tunnels dug with gradients so exact they maintain a steady flow across tens of kilometers, even without metal tools or pumps. What they built was not merely infrastructure, it was faith in continuity, in the belief that the desert could be made to yield. To stand today among the ruins of Garama, as the wind whispers across the stones, is to feel the weight of that faith. The sun burns the earth to ash, yet beneath one's feet lie the ghosts of rivers. Each collapsed shaft marks not only the passage of water, but the passage of hope. The Garamantes understood the desert better than anyone before or after. They knew its cruelty, its silence, its indifference, and so they turned inward, downward, digging into the earth itself for sustenance. Their tunnels were not just physical constructions. They were metaphors for survival, for defiance against extinction. But the desert does not forget. It waits, patient, until human ambition grows weary. Now, from above, all that remains are pale scars traced across the sand, visible only to satellites orbiting far beyond the clouds. The Foggara lie empty, their corridors silent. Yet their memory endures in every place where people still dig for water, still fight to wrest life from desolation. Beneath the dunes of Fezzan, the Garamantes sleep, their cities buried, their tunnels dry. But their idea lives on. The desert remembers their footsteps, even if history does not. Chapter 8, Jerma, the desert metropolis in the heart of the Libyan Sahara, where the desert stretches endlessly in all directions, lies the buried skeleton of a city once alive with trade, ambition, and light. To stand amid the ruins of Jerma, or Garama as it was known to the ancients, is to feel time collapse into sand. The air is still, the sun unyielding, and yet beneath the silence, there lingers the faint pulse of a metropolis that defied the desert. More than 2,000 years ago, Jerma was the beating heart of the Garamantian kingdom, a civilization that flourished where no empire was meant to endure. It was a city of mud brick and stone, built in defiance of thirst and isolation. its streets once filled with merchants, craftsmen, and nobles. To the Romans, who gazed upon the Sahara as a wall of death, the Garamantes were an enigma. Desert dwellers who had mastered what even the empire could not. The story of Jerma begins around the 5th century BCE, when the Garamantes established their capital deep within the Fezzan region of southern Libya. Though surrounded by dunes and desolation, the site was no accident. Jerma rose upon the edge of an underground water system, where hidden aquifers, the remains of ancient rivers, could be tapped through ingenious channels known as fogaras. These subterranean tunnels carried cool water to irrigate fields and orchards, transforming wasteland into a living landscape. It was this mastery of water that made civilization possible in one of the world's most hostile environments. Archaeological surveys have uncovered more than 600 fogaras across the Garamantian heartland. Engineering marvels dug by hand through bedrock, some extending for kilometers beneath the earth. They fed farms of barley and wheat, groves of dates, and gardens of vegetables, sustaining tens of thousands of people. The Garamantes turned the desert into an oasis empire. Jerma's ruins still hint at that lost vitality. Excavations led by British archaeologist Charles Daniels in the 1960s, and later by David Mattingly and the University of Leicester team, revealed a sprawling cityscape. Dense clusters of mud brick dwellings, administrative compounds, and necropolises filled with elaborate tombs. The dead were buried with beads, bronze ornaments, and pottery from distant lands, suggesting a society both wealthy and worldly. Artifacts found at Jerma tell a story of connections that spanned continents. Roman amphorae once filled with olive oil and wine, fragments of glassware from the Mediterranean coast, and African ivory from the south all converged here. Silent witnesses to a thriving trans-Saharan economy. The Garamantes traded salt, gold, and semi-precious stones. They moved goods between the Mediterranean world and sub-Saharan Africa, long before camel caravans became the symbol of desert commerce. To Rome, the Garamantes were both a mystery and a rival. Classical writers such as Herodotus, Pliny, and Tacitus mention them, describing swift chariots racing across the desert sands, warriors who vanished into the dunes before legions could follow. In 19 BCE, the Roman general Cornelius Balbus led a campaign into the Fezzan and briefly captured Garama, boasting of reaching the people of the sands. Yet even then, the Garamantes remained beyond control. Their power was not in conquest, but in their mastery of distance, their ability to thrive where others perished. Jerma's influence radiated outward along invisible highways of sand, trade routes stretching north to Tripolitania, south toward the Niger, and east to the oases of Egypt. Through these routes moved not just goods, but ideas, languages, and technologies. It was here, in the heart of emptiness, that cultures met and mingled. Greek coins, Punic inscriptions, and local Berber symbols have all been found side by side, suggesting a civilization that absorbed and reinterpreted the world around it. Within Jerma's walls, daily life must have moved to the rhythm of the desert sun. Mud brick homes, cool and compact, opened onto courtyards shaded by woven mats. Workshops echoed with the tap of metal workers and potters. Traders gathered in open plazas, weighing salt blocks and amber beads. Above them all rose the citadel, a fortified acropolis overlooking the plain, a reminder that even in a city without external enemies, power required visibility. The Garamantes society appears to have been stratified, yet stable. Elites lived in larger compounds, adorned with imported goods, while farmers and labourers maintained the fogaras that sustained them all. Slavery, too, was part of this system. Not through conquest, but through the movement of human beings along the trade routes that Jerma controlled. Some scholars believe that the Garamantes acted as intermediaries in the trans-Saharan slave trade, centuries before it became formalized by later empires. But beyond economics, Jerma's heart was spiritual. The Garamantes left behind rock art depicting chariots, cattle, and ritual scenes that connect them to older Saharan traditions. Their burial practices, carefully arranged bodies, grave offerings, and circular tombs, suggest a belief in the journey beyond death. Fragments of altars and fire pits hint at ceremonies perhaps tied to the desert's cycles, to the sun and the underworld of water beneath the sand. For centuries, Jerma prospered in isolation, its stability built upon control of the hidden aquifers. But the desert is patient. By the late 4th and 5th centuries CE, climate change and overuse began to drain the subterranean reserves. The forests ran dry, the fields withered, and the lifeblood of the Garamantian kingdom faltered. Without water, trade dwindled. Caravans bypassed the emptying city. By the 6th century, Germa had entered silence. Sandstorms crept over its streets, filling doorways and courtyards, erasing the pathways that once connected it to the world. The last inhabitants abandoned their homes, leaving their pottery, tools, and prayers to the wind. When modern archaeologists first reached the site, they found a ghost city half swallowed by dunes. The outlines of pyramidal tombs and crumbling walls shimmered in the heat haze like mirages, the physical memory of a people who refused to accept the limits of their environment. Excavation revealed not a primitive settlement, but the remnants of a state with literacy, law, and engineering far beyond what the desert should have allowed. Today, Germa lies exposed beneath the same sun that once nourished it. From above, its ruined streets form a faint grid, the shadow of a forgotten metropolis. Wind drifts across the ancient wells, whispering through the mouths of collapsed fogaras that once carried water from the deep. It is a sound both mournful and eternal, the desert reclaiming what was built in defiance of its rule. The Garamantes' disappearance remains a lesson written in dust. Their achievements, irrigation, trade, architecture, testify to human ingenuity pushed to its extreme. Yet their downfall reveals the fragility of even the most resilient civilizations. When water vanished, so did power. When trade routes shifted, memory faded, and yet something of Germa endures. Its name echoes faintly in Tuareg legends and Roman chronicles alike. Its ruins remind us that the Sahara was not always empty, that beneath the dunes lie the bones of cities that once rivaled those of the Mediterranean. Standing among its crumbling walls, one senses the weight of forgotten history, the breath of lives lived and lost, the shimmer of caravans fading into the horizon. The desert gives nothing freely, yet here it once gave birth to a metropolis. Germa remains both monument and mystery, a city carved from dust, ruled by silence, and remembered only by the wind. Chapter 9. The Tadrat Akakos. Carved memories of a vanished world, in the far southwest of Libya, beyond the dunes and the reach of most maps, rises a range of stone that seems to breathe with memory. The Tadrat Akakos, a labyrinth of sandstone ridges, canyons, and caves, stands silent beneath the Saharan sun, but its walls are alive with images. Painted and carved across cliff faces and rock shelters are thousands of scenes that span more than 10,000 years of human experience. Here, art has outlived the world it depicts. The first explorers who entered these valleys in the mid-20th century, among them Fabrizio Mori, could hardly believe what they found. The desert they crossed was a place of emptiness, parched, lifeless, almost lunar. Yet on these ancient walls were giraffes, elephants, crocodiles, and hippopotamuses, creatures of water and grass, not sand. The paintings showed people dancing, hunting, swimming. This was not the Sahara we know. It was a green world, a world long vanished. Radiocarbon dating would later confirm that the earliest of these images belonged to a time around 12,000 BCE, when the climate of North Africa was utterly different. Periodic shifts in Earth's orbit had altered monsoon patterns, transforming the region into fertile savannas dotted with lakes and rivers. The ancestors who lived here were hunter-gatherers, following herds of game across a land that today seems impossible. Their art tells us who they were and how they saw their world. In the oldest phase, the so-called Roundhead period, figures appear ghostly and abstract, with round, featureless faces and elongated limbs. Some float weightlessly, surrounded by animals or strange shapes that defy easy interpretation. Archaeologists see in them early expressions of trance or spiritual experience, moments when human and divine merged in ritual. In these paintings, the desert's earliest inhabitants reached beyond survival, toward meaning. As centuries passed, the environment began to shift. The rains grew less predictable, lakes receded, but the people adapted. Around 7000 BCE, new scenes emerge. Groups of men and women herding cattle, sheep, and goats. This marks the beginning of the pastoral period, when humans began to domesticate animals and settle near the shrinking water sources. The artists of this age recorded their lives with astonishing intimacy. Families lead their herds across grasslands, Women milk cows beneath acacia trees. Children play while men dance with curved sticks and drums. It is the visual diary of a society learning to live in rhythm with a drying land. The cattle themselves often take center stage, painted in careful detail, adorned with horns and patterns that seem to hold symbolic meaning. Some scenes show people offering cattle in ritual sacrifice, echoing later practices found along the Nile. Was this coincidence or continuity? Many researchers believe that as the Sahara dried further, its pastoral peoples migrated eastward and southward, toward the Nile Valley, the Sahel, and beyond, carrying with them a shared iconography of cattle and reverence for life-sustaining water. In this way, the Tadrata carcass may not only record local history, but also the birth of a cultural migration that shaped much of Africa. The Green Sahara, once a cradle of life, became a bridge between worlds. Its fading rains scattered its people like seeds, and their traditions took root wherever the waters still flowed. Later panels, dating between 3000 and 1000 BCE, reveal an even starker transformation. The animals of the savannah disappear, replaced by camels and horses, creatures of the desert. The hunters of elephants and gazelles give way to traders and travelers. Rock shelters that once overlooked lakes now stare across seas of sand. The art shifts tone, from celebration to endurance. The once green Sahara had become the largest desert on Earth, and yet the people did not vanish. They adapted again. The final carvings, made as late as the 1st centuries CE, show figures armed with spears and shields, men riding camels, caravans winding through dunes. The Sahara had entered its historical age, no longer a home, but a highway. Through these canyons moved traders, nomads, and pilgrims, heirs to the memory of the rains that once fell here. Each layer of art in the Tadrata carcass is like a stratum of time, each pigment a fragment of climate, faith, and survival. Together, they form an atlas of transformation, a record not just of one people, but of humanity's dialogue with the earth itself. The style and technique of these artworks suggest more than simple storytelling. The pigments were made from crushed ochres, charcoal, and minerals mixed with fat or water. Many figures are painted deep within rock shelters, protected from the elements, as if the artist knew they were making something meant to endure. Some paintings occupy the same space as earlier ones, overlapping, fading, re-emerging. It is as if generations return to these places, revisiting their ancestors' marks, adding their own voices to an ongoing conversation across millennia. Archaeologists now study not only the images, but their context, the hearths and pottery shards scattered near the shelters, the footprints of fires that once flickered against the walls. Radiocarbon dates drawn from these ashes help trace the long arc of climate collapse, from lush plains to desolation. The story written in pigment is mirrored by the story written in dust. But even amidst scientific precision, mystery remains. The roundhead figures, those faceless beings who hover in ancient compositions, defy easy interpretation. Some appear to merge with animals or float in ritual poses, as if depicting shamanic transformation. Others seem colossal, towering over humans and beasts alike. To some, they represent early deities. To others, the expression of altered consciousness. Whatever their meaning, they reveal a mind already attuned to the metaphysical, a sense of spirit that predates the organized religions of later millennia. The Tadrata carcass thus stands as both museum and scripture, a place where the earliest human questions were carved into stone. Who are we? What is our place in the cosmos? How do we survive when the world itself changes? Yet the preservation of this ancient archive is fragile. Modern threats, looting, erosion, even war, have endangered many of these artworks. In recent decades, damage from conflict and vandalism has scarred some of the most important panels. The desert that once protected these carvings now exposes them to human indifference. The irony is sharp. What endured 10,000 years of wind and drought may not survive a single generation of neglect. Still, even in their fading, the images speak. They whisper of continuity, of lives measured not in empires or dynasties, but in adaptation and resilience. Each painted animal, each carved hunter, is a witness to the most profound transformation in human history, the birth of the desert and the exodus it inspired. Standing before those silent walls, one senses the immensity of time pressing inward. The ancient lake beds lie buried beneath the dunes. The elephants and hippos are gone. The people who painted them have become dust. But the stories remain, suspended in pigment and line. At dusk, as the sun falls behind the jagged silhouettes of the Akarkas cliffs, the rock faces glow red, as if illuminated from within. In that moment, one can almost see them again, the hunters, the herders, the dancers, alive in motion, caught between the world of water and the world of sand. The Tadrat Akarkas is more than a gallery of prehistoric art. It is a mirror held up to deep time, a reminder that landscapes remember, and that even the driest deserts were once oceans of life. Its carvings are not just the memory of a vanished world, but a warning carved in stone, that all worlds, even ours, can vanish too, and when they do, perhaps only the stones will remember. Chapter 10. The Lost Lakes of Megachadin, the heart of Africa, where desert now reigns and wind sculpts dunes of silence, the earth still remembers a vanished ocean. Beneath the Sahel's cracked soil and scattered oases lies the ghost of something immense, a lake so vast it once stretched from Niger to Chad, from Nigeria to Cameroon. Its ancient name, recovered through science and myth alike, is Megachad, a freshwater sea that rivaled the Caspian in scale and shaped the destinies of early humankind. Today, Lake Chad is a shadow of its former self, a shallow, muddy remnant spanning less than 2,000 square kilometers at its driest. But in the deep past, it covered nearly 400,000 square kilometers, an inland paradise larger than modern Germany. Its shorelines once glimmered beneath monsoon-fed skies, its waters teeming with fish and life. The air would have been heavy with humidity, not dust. The land, green and generous. What we call desert today was once the cradle of abundance. The first hints of this lost world came not from the ground, but from above. In the late 20th century, satellite imagery revealed sweeping arcs and pale ridges curving across the sands, faint scars that could only have been ancient shorelines. These ghostly outlines, visible from space, traced the perimeters of an enormous vanished lake. Scientists called it Paleo Lake Megachad, and in doing so, they opened one of Africa's greatest forgotten chapters. As researchers overlaid satellite data with on-the-ground surveys, a more detailed picture emerged. Around 7,000 to 5,000 BCE, during the African humid period, monsoon systems pushed northward, turning the Sahara into a vast green mosaic of lakes, grasslands, and rivers. Megachad was the centerpiece of this watery world, a vast inland basin that gathered rain and runoff from the surrounding highlands. It became a magnet for life, a meeting point for herders, foragers, and early farmers who thrived on its fertile margins. Archaeological discoveries confirm that human communities ringed its shores. Fragments of pottery, fishing tools, and stone implements have been found buried in sediment layers that once lay beneath shallow water. In the dunes of northern Chad and Niger, researchers have uncovered burial mounds containing human remains alongside animal bones and crafted ornaments. The level of organization implied by these finds, planned settlements, communal fishing, trade, suggests more than mere survival. It hints at society. To imagine life beside Megachad is to step into another world. Picture a horizon where water met sky and reed villages floated along the lake's edges. Canoes carved from massive logs glided between islands, laden with fish, grain, and pottery. Herds grazed on the lush banks, watched over by herders whose descendants would one day scatter across Africa's drylands. In this place, water was not only life, it was civilization. Some archaeologists suggest that the Yedsaram and Komadugu valleys, which feed into the modern Lake Chad basin, may once have been cradles of early irrigated agriculture. The abundance of water and fertile soil would have encouraged experimentation with planting and crop management long before such practices took root further east along the Nile. If true, then the Megachad basin was not just a sanctuary. It may have been one of the world's earliest laboratories of cultivation. But water, like history, is never still. Around 5,000 years ago, the climate began to shift once again. The monsoons retreated southward, and the Great Lake began to shrink. As the Green Sahara dried, Megachad's surface fractured into smaller basins, Bodel, Fitri, and Chad itself. Vast stretches of lakebed turned to dust, leaving behind stranded fish skeletons and salt-encrusted dunes. Human communities were forced to adapt, or to move. This slow catastrophe unfolded over centuries, but its impact was profound. Villages that once rested on fertile deltas found themselves miles from water. Trade routes collapsed. Fishers became herders. Farmers became nomads. Some groups followed the retreating waters southward into the forests of West Africa. Others journeyed north and east, toward the oases of the Central Sahara or the nascent kingdoms forming along the Nile. It is here that the story of Megachad begins to blur into legend. Some anthropologists trace the migrations of the Kanembu and the Hausa, peoples who later dominated the Sahelian trade routes, back to these ancient lake dwellers. Linguistic patterns and cultural echoes, rituals tied to water, burial customs, and cattle veneration seem to ripple outward from the vanished basin. In this sense, Megachad may have been more than a lake. It was a fountainhead of civilizations yet to come. The Bodel Depression, today the world's largest source of airborne dust, once formed the deepest heart of the lake. Now a barren expanse of wind-blown sand, it paradoxically continues to shape the planet's climate. Every year, millions of tons of its dust are carried across the Atlantic, fertilizing the Amazon rainforest. In a strange twist of continuity, the dead lake still gives life. Its remains nurturing one of Earth's richest ecosystems, half a world away. But if Megachad's ecological memory is global, its human memory remains elusive. The archaeological record is patchy, fragmented by erosion and time. Excavations are difficult in this politically unstable and remote region. Yet the clues that have emerged, pottery designs resembling those of early Nubian and Sahelian cultures, fishhook styles shared across vast distances, suggest a web of connection far beyond the lake's shores. Trade, ideas, and rituals may have circulated across Africa's interior thousands of years before written history began. Some researchers speak of a proto-Sahelian network, a corridor of interaction linking the Niger Bend to the Nile Valley. Megachad, at its height, would have sat at the center of this network, its waters uniting rather than dividing. The idea challenges traditional models that see early African civilizations as isolated or derivative. Instead, it suggests that the heart of the continent was once a crossroads of innovation and exchange. Still, many questions remain unanswered. Did the lake support organized political structures, chiefdoms perhaps, or proto-states? Were there rituals tied to the rise and fall of the waters, ceremonies of renewal as the lake expanded and contracted with the seasons? Some engravings found near ancient shorelines depict boats, serpents, and circular motifs, symbols that may represent the cyclical nature of water and life. Could these be the earliest expressions of a hydrological faith, one that saw the lake as a living deity? Satellite imagery continues to rewrite this story. High-resolution scans now reveal the faint grids of what might be ancient fields or settlement patterns beneath layers of sand. These geometric traces hint at deliberate planning, irrigation channels, defensive enclosures, perhaps even ceremonial sites. Each discovery adds weight to the idea that the Megachad Basin hosted a complex society whose memory was later washed away by drought. When modern herders cross the Sahel with their camels and cattle, they tread upon sediments once rich with fish bones and freshwater shells. Beneath their feet lie the remnants of harbors, markets, and villages that no longer exist. In a sense, the desert itself is a palimpsest, its topography still bearing the ghost outlines of the drowned world beneath. Some local legends, passed quietly through generations, still speak of a sea that walked away. Among the Kanuri and Tubu peoples, stories tell of a time when the land was blue and endless, when ancestors sailed across open waters where dunes now rise. Whether these are memories of the lake or mythic retellings of its loss, they preserve a sense of continuity that science is only now beginning to confirm. The shrinking of Lake Chad in modern times, its reduction by over 90% in just a century, feels like a haunting recurrence of that ancient desiccation. The same cycles of drought, displacement, and struggle echo across the millennia. It is as if the lake's ancient breath still shapes the fate of those who live near its shores. The land remembers its tides, even when the water is gone. Perhaps the people of Megachad never truly vanished. Perhaps they live on in the rhythms of the Sahel, the migratory routes, the water rituals, the music and oral histories that speak of lost abundance. Like the dust of the Bodel Depression, their legacy drifts invisibly, nourishing distant roots of identity and myth. In the end, Megachad is more than a vanished lake. It is a mirror of the human story, of creation and collapse, of migration and memory, a reminder that what disappears beneath sand and silence is never truly lost. Somewhere beneath the dunes, the ancient shoreline still glows faintly under the sun, a pale scar across the earth, whispering of waves that no longer break, and of civilizations that may yet lie sleeping below. The desert forgets slowly, and sometimes the wind still smells faintly of rain. Chapter 11. The Trade Routes of the Ancient Sahara. Before the desert became an ocean of silence, it was alive with footsteps, paths etched by human hands, not yet erased by wind, once bound the heart of Africa to the edges of the known world. Long before the Romans mapped their empire, before the first camel caravan ever crossed the dunes, the Sahara was a web of movement, of trade, pilgrimage, and exchange. Archaeologists now see it not as an empty expanse, but as an ancient corridor. Across Niger, Libya, and southern Algeria, stone beads and ostrich shell ornaments have surfaced in sites that predate written history. Artifacts from a time when the Sahara still remembered the sound of rain. These beads, carved with care, appear hundreds of kilometers from their source. Obsidian flakes from Ethiopian highlands have been discovered in the western reaches of the desert. Copper ornaments from the Fezzan turn up in prehistoric Niger. Each fragment tells a story of movement, of trade routes so old they vanish into the Neolithic twilight. The first traders were not merchants in the modern sense, but nomads, herders, hunters, and artisans, following the rhythms of season and survival. They carried goods across what was then a mosaic of grasslands, lakes, and forests. Around 6000 BCE, the Sahara was green, dotted with rivers and inland seas. Settlements clustered near oases that no longer exist. In this verdant landscape, movement was life, and trade the language of connection. As the climate shifted, the rains faltered, the lakes shrank into salt flats, and the nomads began to follow new routes, paths between the last surviving wells, between mountains and fading rivers. In this crucible of change, the first true desert trade routes were born. By the second millennium BCE, these routes connected the heart of the Sahara to the kingdoms of the Nile and the Maghreb. Archaeologists have traced ancient roads through the Aya Mountains of Niger, linking early metalworkers and pastoral communities to the Libyan Fezzan. They traded cattle, ivory, and ostrich feathers, luxuries that would one day adorn Egyptian tombs. The Garamantes, the desert kingdom that flourished between 500 BCE and 500 CE, inherited and expanded this web. From their capital at Jerma, deep within the Fezzan, they sent expeditions across the sands. Their Foggara irrigation channels supported oases that became rest stops for caravans. Ancient tracks radiate outward from their settlements like the spokes of a wheel, northward to the Roman ports of Tripolitania, southward toward the Niger River basin, and west toward the Tassili plateau. Roman records mention these routes with both awe and fear. Pliny the Elder wrote of a road through the desert, watered by wells placed a day's journey apart, while Ptolemy mapped oases, whose names have since been lost to the wind. The Romans coveted the treasures of the interior, gold, salt, slaves, and exotic beasts, and relied on the Garamantes as intermediaries. From the oases of Fezzan, caravans carried blocks of salt from the desert mines, hides and ivory from sub-Saharan forests, and fine metalwork from the Niger Valley. In return, the Garamantes received glass, wine, and Roman weapons. But trade is never only about goods. It carries with it language, belief, and memory. Along these routes, cultures mingled. Berber tongues met those of black African kingdoms. Egyptian symbols mingled with local rock art. Archaeological sites across the Central Sahara reveal inscriptions carved in Tifinagh, the ancient Berber script, alongside engravings of Roman chariots and sub-Saharan motifs. The desert was not a barrier, but a bridge, a place where civilizations touched and transformed each other. Centuries later, with the domestication of the camel around the first millennium BCE, the Sahara's arteries expanded again. The camel changed everything. It could carry heavy loads, survive weeks without water, and navigate the open dunes that had once divided worlds. What had been isolated corridors of trade became vast networks, routes stretching from the Senegal River to the Nile, from Timbuktu to Tripoli. These camel caravans forged what we now call the trans-Saharan trade. By the time of the Roman Empire's decline, desert merchants were moving tons of goods each year. Gold from West Africa flowed north to mint coins in Mediterranean cities. Salt, mined in the desert at Tagaza and Bilma, moved south to preserve food and sustain life in tropical regions. Slaves, textiles, spices, and glassware traveled in both directions. The trade was perilous. Caravans numbering in the hundreds of camels crossed wastelands where a single storm could erase every trace of their passing. Oases became sanctuaries and empires unto themselves. The salt town of Kawar, the oasis of Gat, the caravan hub of Gadames, all rose from the pulse of this trade. Even when empires fell, the roots endured. By the medieval period, the ancient roads had evolved into sophisticated networks connecting the Islamic world with West Africa's great kingdoms, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. These kingdoms inherited the same routes once used by the Garamantes, transforming them into conduits of global commerce. Caravans laden with gold dust from the Niger's bend journeyed north for months to reach the markets of Tripoli and Tunis. From there, European traders would carry African gold to the farthest reaches of Christendom. Through these paths, not only gold, but knowledge traveled. It was along the desert's veins that Islam spread into sub-Saharan Africa, carried by traders and scholars alike. The Arabic script mingled with local languages. Architectural styles from North Africa appeared in cities like Timbuktu and Gao. The Sahara had become more than a trade zone. It was a cultural bloodstream linking continents. Yet, as with all living systems, it began to dry. Climate change advanced. The Fogaras collapsed as the underground water tables fell. Caravans dwindled as new maritime routes along the Atlantic stole their purpose. The old oases, lifelines of the ancient world, were abandoned. Many disappeared entirely beneath the dunes, leaving only faint depressions and scattered pottery to mark their passing. Still, traces endure. Satellite surveys over Libya and Niger reveal long, straight lines, ancient tracks, visible only from above. Some run for hundreds of kilometers across the emptiest regions of the desert. Others converge on forgotten oases, now reduced to mirages of sand. These are not the marks of nature, but of persistence. They are the fingerprints of human movement, of civilizations that refuse to let the desert divide them. In the sands around Murzouk, archaeologists have found Roman amphorae and African glass beads together in the same strata. In the dunes of the Tenezruft, stone cairns mark places where caravans once rested. Every find is a fragment of the same story. That beneath the apparent silence of the Sahara lies the memory of an ancient connectivity, the first global network of exchange. It challenges the myth of isolation. The Sahara was not the edge of the world. It was its center. The great empires of Egypt, Carthage, and Rome depended on the resources drawn from its depths. And the kingdoms of the south, in turn, drew strength from the lifeblood that flowed through its oases. Today, archaeologists continue to trace these forgotten arteries, mapping them through radar and satellite imagery. Each discovery redefines what we know of prehistory, hinting that organized trade may have existed here long before the rise of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Some scholars now argue that the roots of urban life in Africa, the very idea of the city, may have grown first along these desert roads. When we look upon the Sahara today, vast and still, it is easy to mistake silence for emptiness. But beneath that silence lies the hum of ancient exchange, the echo of 1,000 journeys that once tied the world together. And perhaps, if one listens closely on a windless night, when the dunes hold their breath, one might still hear the faint jingle of caravan bells fading into the horizon, echoes of a time when the desert was not a void, but a living bridge between worlds. Chapter 12. Diado Plateau. The ruins in the dust in the far northeast of Niger, where the Sahara stretches into an ocean of stone and silence. There rises a place of haunting beauty and deeper mystery. The Diado Plateau, an isolated world of sandstone cliffs, dry wadis, and wind-sculpted mesas, sits like a forgotten island in a sea of dunes. Its color is the color of bone and rust, its silence almost sacred, and upon its surface stand ruins, ghostly fortresses that seem to have been abandoned not centuries ago, but ages beyond memory. They call it the City of Ghosts. From a distance, its towers appear like the ribs of some ancient beast rising from the earth. Walls crumble into the dust, yet doorways and windows remain, staring out over the endless desert like the hollow eyes of skulls. At sunset, the ruins turn gold, and as the light fades, they seem to breathe, alive again for a moment, before night takes them. No one lives there now. Even the Tuareg, who roam these regions as masters of the Sahara, avoid spending nights among its stones. They say it is cursed. Legends tell of a people who once ruled this place in great splendor before they vanished, fleeing disease, betrayal, or something far older that walked in the sands. To the Tuareg, Jado is Tenerein Gale, the forbidden desert. Strange lights are said to flicker above the plateau at night. Whispers claim the wind that howls through its ruins carries voices, not of the living, but of those who once were. Yet beyond myth, archaeology paints a different, but equally mysterious portrait. The fortresses of Jado, though eroded and skeletal, bear architectural features of the medieval Sahara. Thick stone walls reinforced with palm trunks, high watchtowers, and narrow inner courtyards. Many scholars suggest they were part of a network of Saharan trade outposts, linking the great trans-Saharan routes that connected the kingdoms of West Africa to the Mediterranean world. Salt, gold, and slaves once moved through these corridors of sand. To control such a route meant power, and perhaps that is why Jado was built, to guard the arteries of ancient commerce. But others see signs of an older story, buried beneath this one. Around the plateau, scattered on cliffs and canyon walls, are petroglyphs, rock carvings that predate the fortresses by thousands of years. They show cattle with long, curving horns, giraffes, elephants, and later, camels. These images mark the Sahara's changing face, from a land of green savannas and lakes to the desert we know today. The carvings suggest that people lived here long before the medieval era, perhaps as far back as 6000 BCE, during the so-called Green Sahara, when rains nourished grasslands and rivers crossed what is now wasteland. In that age, the Jado Plateau may have been home to pastoralists who herded cattle beneath acacia trees, whose descendants watched their world slowly wither into dust. What makes Jado haunting, however, is not only its age, but its emptiness. No written record names its builders. No inscription explains its fall. Only fragments remain, shards of pottery, traces of hearths, the outlines of water systems that once held life. And always, the wind, erasing more with every passing season. The first European to document Jado was French explorer Henri Lotte in the mid-20th century, better known for his studies of the Tassili Naja cave art farther north. When Lotte reached Jado, he found not a single inhabitant, only the skeletal remains of a town whose walls seemed ancient beyond reckoning. He noted its strategic position, perched on a rocky outcrop, overlooking a basin where a seasonal pool sometimes formed after rare rains. That pool, now a stagnant marsh, still bears the ghost of its former importance. Without it, no one could survive here for long. Archaeological surveys later placed the construction of the Jado fortress between the 12th and 15th centuries CE. Though this dating remains uncertain, at that time, the Kanem-Bornu Empire, centered around Lake Chad to the southeast, was expanding across the desert's trade frontiers. Some historians propose that Jado was a northern outpost of that empire, a sentinel fortress guarding caravans heading toward the oases of Bilma and the Mediterranean beyond. Others argue it may have been built by independent Saharan tribes, perhaps the ancestors of the Tebu or the early Tuareg, who rose to power in these regions after the decline of Kanem-Bornu. Whatever the truth, Jado thrived only briefly before vanishing into ruin. Its demise remains one of the desert's quieter enigmas. Was it plague, conflict, drought, or the gradual death of trade routes that once gave it purpose? In oral tradition, the tale takes darker turns. It is said that the inhabitants angered the desert's spirits, that their greed brought a curse. Others claim the marsh below became poisoned, its stagnant waters breeding disease that swept through the fortress, leaving it empty overnight. When later travelers came, they found the city silent, its wells choked with sand. Even today, the remains of Jado resist easy categorization. Satellite imagery shows not one fortress but several, scattered across the plateau and nearby valleys. Each follows a similar design. Walls of sun-dried stone rising up to 4 meters high, reinforced with palm beams still visible in the crumbling masonry. Within are rooms, corridors, and stairways leading to upper levels, evidence of a society familiar with architecture, organization, and defense. Yet none of these sites has yielded inscriptions, coins, or artifacts precise enough to anchor them firmly in time. They exist instead in a historical limbo, half memory, half mirage. The landscape around Jado deepens this mystery. Beyond the ruins stretch salt flats and dunes, their surfaces shimmering like water under the desert sun. To the west lies the Kawa Valley, a line of oases that once supported caravan traffic between Chad and Tripoli. To the east, the desert rises into bare escarpments where nothing grows. In such isolation, it is easy to see how an entire city could vanish, leaving behind only dust and rumor. Yet even as the desert consumes it, Jado endures, both as a riddle and as a testament. It reminds us that the Sahara, often imagined as eternal emptiness, has not always been still. Beneath its silence lies the memory of movement, of human ambition, of civilizations that came and went like mirages. Each ruin is a footprint of time, each fortress a frozen echo of a life that once pulsed in the world's driest heart. Modern researchers continue to probe its secrets. Using remote sensing, archaeologists have mapped the plateau's hidden structures, some possibly older than the medieval citadel itself. Traces of buried walls, collapsed dwellings, and faint outlines of ancient fields suggest layers of occupation spanning thousands of years. And on nearby cliffs, newer petroglyphs show camels and caravans, signs that life persisted here even as the desert claimed the land. Perhaps Jado's story is not one of a single city, but of many, built, abandoned, and rebuilt as climate and trade shifted through the ages. Still, the site remains perilous to reach. Sandstorms sweep across the plateau without warning, erasing tracks in minutes. Temperatures soar beyond 50 degrees Celsius by day, dropping to near freezing by night. The marsh below, now reduced to toxic pools of green water, exudes a faint chemical smell, unfit for life. And the silence stretches unbroken, save for the sighing of the wind through ruined windows. It is in that silence that one feels the weight of the place most deeply. For Jado is not merely a ruin, it is the ghost of time itself. As twilight descends over the plateau, the fortress glows once more in the dying light. Shadows stretch along its walls, and for a moment it seems inhabited again, by the unseen, by the remembered. No historian can say for certain who built it, nor why they left. But standing among the ruins, one senses that their story is not entirely gone. It lingers in the stones, in the carvings of camels on nearby rocks, in the myths whispered by desert travelers. Perhaps the builders of Jado were not erased, but absorbed into the Sahara, their legacy carried onward by those who followed the same ancient roots. The desert forgets nothing, it only hides, and somewhere beneath the shifting sands, the deeper truth of Jado may yet sleep, waiting for the day it will rise again into the light. Until then, the fortresses remain, watching over the emptiness, guarding a secret older than history itself. The wind moves through their hollow corridors, and the dust dances once more, like memory refusing to die. Chapter 13. The Forgotten Kingdom of Zindarin. The heart of southern Niger, where the Sahel's ochre sands give way to whispers of savannah, lies a city with a memory far older than its chronicles. Zinda, known today as a quiet provincial centre, once pulsed at the centre of caravan routes that bound the Mediterranean to the deep interior of Africa. Its narrow alleys, ochre walls, and crumbling minarets speak of centuries of trade and transformation. Yet beneath the dust of history, archaeologists and storytellers alike suspect something deeper, a shadow kingdom buried beneath its very foundations. For centuries, Islamic chroniclers celebrated Zinda's rise in the 18th and 19th centuries, the era of the Damagaram sultans, whose palaces still stand like echoes of fading authority. But the city's story, when traced through the layers of soil and memory, stretches much further back. Oral traditions in the region whisper of a time before Islam, before the caravans, when Zinda was already old, and its rulers bore names no written text has preserved. Among the Hausa-speaking peoples and Tuareg nomads, fragments of these stories endure. They speak of Zindar, or Zindaru, the place of first water, where ancient chiefs ruled over fertile basins long before the desert claimed them. Some versions describe a lineage of kings buried beneath mounds now mistaken for dunes. Others speak of a vanished river that once ran through the valley, a reminder of an age when the Sahara itself was green. In the 1970s, a small archaeological team led by French researchers began surveying the region around Zinda. curious about local reports of ancient pottery and strange circular mounds near the villages of Tanut and Damagaram Takaya. What they found confounded expectations. Shards of ceramics dating not to the Islamic period, but to the late Neolithic, between 3000 and 2000 BCE. The fragments bore decorations akin to those found far north in the Fezzan and the Tassili Naja, the lands once home to the Garamantes and other early Saharan cultures. Could it be that Zinda, far from being a late medieval outpost, was a distant echo of those prehistoric civilizations? If so, it would bridge a gap between the pastoral rock art societies of the Central Sahara and the urban trade networks of later millennia. Excavations also revealed small tumuli, burial mounds aligned in curious patterns, each containing skeletal remains accompanied by beads, copper trinkets, and clay figurines. The orientation of these burials, facing neither Mecca nor the Nile, suggested pre-Islamic ritual practices. Carbon dating hinted at astonishing antiquity, perhaps older than the earliest known trans-Saharan trade. Even today, locals avoid disturbing these sites. They are said to be cursed or protected by the ancestors. In the dry season, winds sweep over the mounds, producing low, moaning sounds, as if the dunes themselves were whispering the names of forgotten kings. To walk through Zinda's old quarter is to feel that same layering of time. The Sultan's palace, once a symbol of authority, now stands beside colonial-era buildings, relics of another empire that tried to write over older truths. Beneath both, the earth holds still deeper stories. Pottery shards are found in the foundations of homes. Beads turn up after rains. The people call them dijim, the jewels of the ancients. What makes Zinda so compelling is its continuity, a thread connecting myth and archaeology. The city was a node long before the idea of borders. Caravans from Tripoli and Fezzan brought salt, dates, and cloth. In return, Zinda offered ivory, ostrich feathers, and slaves. But such exchanges rest on older pathways, the same ancient corridors that once guided herders and hunters across a wetter Sahara thousands of years ago. Satellite imagery, paired with geomorphological studies, has traced paleochannels, the dried remains of ancient rivers, converging near the region. These waterways, now lifeless, once linked the heart of the Sahara to the Lake Chad basin. If Zinda stood near such a network, it would have been a natural center of human settlement, a place where early Saharan peoples gathered long before history began to record. There are hints, too, in the art and language. Certain motifs in the pottery of ancient Zinda resemble designs found as far west as the Dar Tichit culture of Mauritania, a possible sign of shared symbolism or even migration. And in the oral poetry of the Kanuri and Hausa bards, words for foundation, well, and circle appear in forms older than their known linguistic lineages. Perhaps they are fossils of speech, fragments of a tongue that once unified the desert's people. As centuries passed, climate shifted. The Sahara's monsoon retreated. Lakes dried, civilizations fractured or vanished. Yet in Zinda's basin, life endured. What had been a thriving landscape of pastures became a caravan halt, and eventually a capital of empires. The Damagaram rulers, when they built their palaces and mosques, did so atop layers of dust filled with bones and memories. One of the most intriguing finds from the region came in 1996, when local farmers uncovered a cache of large terracotta vessels near an ancient well east of Zinda. Inside one lay the remains of a burial, a body wrapped in plant fibers, preserved by dryness. Around the neck were stone beads and a small carved amulet of unknown origin. The amulet bore geometric engravings, lines forming concentric spirals, reminiscent of patterns found in Neolithic Saharan art. The piece was later stored in Niamey's National Museum, but no definitive origin has been agreed upon. Some researchers suggest the amulet represents a solar motif, perhaps tied to early sky-watching practices common across prehistoric North Africa. Others believe it symbolized fertility or a cosmological cycle. Yet its context, a burial beneath an old well, evokes something deeper: the union of earth and water, death and renewal. If this interpretation is true, Zinda's ancient inhabitants may have shared a worldview in which life and landscape were one. The well, the mound, and the horizon were all sacred, markers in a cosmological map that once stretched. From Nubia to the Niger, it is tempting to imagine a time when the ancestors of Zinda's People looked to the same stars as those of Nabta Playa or Tassili, when they buried their chiefs beneath the rising sun, believing that the desert itself would one day remember their names. But history is rarely kind to memory. Empires came, the Bornu, the Hausa city-states, the French colonials, each layering new identities over the old. The names of the first rulers faded into silence, their tombs lost beneath the shifting sand. Only faint echoes remain, in the rhythm of local drums, in proverbs that speak of those who built before the drought, in the stones that crumble yet refuse to vanish. Zinder today stands as a paradox, a modern city built upon invisible ruins. Beneath the hum of motorcycles and the scent of millet fires lies a silence older than empire. Archaeologists continue to map the area, piecing together what little evidence survives, but most of Zinder's prehistory remains hidden, unexcavated, or erased by time. Perhaps it is fitting that the city's name, Zinder, carries within it a resonance, a reminder of sound, of vibration, as if the earth itself hums with the memory of its forgotten kings. In the end, we are left with questions rather than answers. Was Zinder merely a hub of trade, or the last heartbeat of a civilization swallowed by sand? Were its rulers lost to drought, migration, or conquest, or simply to the indifference of history? As twilight falls over the Sahel and the wind begins to rise, one can almost hear the dunes breathing. Soft, rhythmic, eternal. Beneath that sound lies a truth too ancient to name, that every forgotten kingdom still remembers itself, waiting for someone to listen. Chapter 14. The Mystery of the Libyan Desert. Glass in the far reaches of Egypt's western desert, where the sands stretch unbroken to the horizon. There lies a secret older than civilization itself, a vast, shimmering field of glass, translucent, greenish-yellow, and hauntingly pure. Locals call it the Great Sand Sea. But to scientists and mystics alike, it is known by a more evocative name, Libyan desert glass. This is no ordinary substance. It is among the purest natural silica ever found on Earth, 99% pure, glowing softly under the relentless desert sun. Scattered fragments, some small as pebbles, others the size of a man's hand, are strewn across an area stretching hundreds of square kilometers. They are the frozen tears of an ancient fire, a fire whose origin no one has ever fully explained. The story of this desert glass begins not with humans, but with an event that predates humanity by 26 million years. Somewhere in the forgotten epochs of Earth's deep past, an unimaginable burst of energy seared the surface of what is now the Libyan desert. Temperatures soared beyond 2,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to liquefy sand. And when the fire faded, the land had been transformed into a sheet of molten glass, later shattered by wind, time, and the silence of geological eternity. Yet the puzzle remains. What kind of force could create such a field of glass without leaving a trace of itself behind? For decades, scientists believed it must have been a meteorite impact. After all, similar forms of natural glass called tektites are known to form when extraterrestrial bodies slam into Earth, melting and flinging sand outward in molten sprays. But the Libyan desert glass is different. There is no crater, no epicenter, no conclusive sign of where such a meteor might have struck. Some have suggested it was not an impact, but a cometary airburst, a cosmic body exploding in the atmosphere before reaching the ground, its heat wave enough to fuse the sands below. This theory gained attention in the early 2000s when scientists compared the glass's internal structure to that found in materials formed during high-energy airbursts. But even here, the evidence is uncertain. The chemical signatures, the mineral inclusions, the absence of shock quartz all refuse to align neatly with any single theory. In truth, the desert glass remains a geological enigma, a scar without a wound, an explosion without a source. For the ancient Egyptians, however, its mystery was no scientific puzzle. It was a gift from the heavens. To them, this radiant glass was not an accident of geology. It was sacred. It was the frozen breath of Ra, the sun god, fallen to earth. When archaeologists uncovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, they found, nestled in his elaborate golden breastplate, a carved scarab made not of emerald or jade, but of Libyan desert glass. Modern analysis revealed its origin unmistakably. The glass had been carried from the far-off western desert, polished by the hands of artisans who may never have understood the cosmic violence that birthed it. Imagine that. A pharaoh, buried with a jewel older than the Nile itself, a relic forged by fire before mankind even existed, now placed upon the chest of a boy king so his spirit might find its way among the stars. It is one of those rare moments in history when geology and myth seem to merge, when Earth's cataclysms are transformed into symbols of eternity. But how did the Egyptians even find it? The Libyan desert is one of the harshest places on the planet, a sea of dunes, vast and uninhabitable. Ancient trade routes skirted its edges, yet the source region of the glass lies deep within, far beyond where most travelers dared to go. Some believe nomadic tribes or desert dwellers carried it to the Nile. Others suggest that ancient expeditions, perhaps during the reigns of the early dynasties, ventured westward in search of exotic materials, the same spirit of exploration that once brought lapis from Afghanistan and gold from Nubia. Whatever the path, by the time of the New Kingdom, Libyan desert glass had entered the world of Egyptian sacred art, and its use was deliberate. The scarab, symbol of rebirth and transformation, carved from a material born of celestial fire, there could be no more fitting talisman for the afterlife. Modern scientists have tried to recreate the process. They have melted sands in furnaces, simulated impacts, detonated explosives, yet none have managed to produce glass of such purity, such scale, or such mystery. The very composition of the Libyan desert glass, its subtle internal bubbles, its streaks of melted zircon crystals, suggests a heat so intense it borders on the cosmic. And here, the imagination begins to wander. Could there have been some ancient event, greater than any known meteorite strike, stranger than any volcanic blast, that erased its own evidence? Or could the glass be the remnant of something else entirely, something beyond natural geology? These questions echo eerily when compared to other mysterious glasses found across the ancient world. In the sands of the Sahara, similar though smaller patches of fused glass have been found. In Scotland, ancient forts called vitrified forts bear walls melted by heat unknown in primitive warfare. And in the deserts of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists once discovered skeletons fused to the ground as if exposed to sudden, intense radiation. Most of these cases have conventional explanations, but they all whisper the same unsettling thought, that in humanity's deep past, forces of unimaginable energy once touched the Earth. For now, however, the Libyan desert glass remains one of the few enduring witnesses. A geological anomaly, yes, but also a kind of memory. A memory preserved in stone, untelling and unbroken. When the sunlight strikes the fragments scattered across the dunes, they glow softly, like ancient lanterns buried in sand. Some explorers have described the field as almost otherworldly, silent, lifeless, yet filled with the faint suggestion of power, as if the land itself remembers the fire that once swept over it. Today, collectors prize it. Museums display it, but standing before it, feeling the dry wind whisper across the dunes, it's difficult not to sense that something larger, something older, is being glimpsed through the veil of time. Perhaps that is why it continues to fascinate us. Not only because we do not know how it formed, but because, in it, we glimpse a bridge between heaven and earth, between catastrophe and creation. It is as if the desert itself holds a frozen echo of the cosmos, a message in glass, unread but undeniable. And so, across millions of years, this silent relic endures. The winds shift, the dunes move, but the glass remains, unchanged, untouched, imperishable. Scientists may one day discover its origin, map the moment of its birth, and trace it to a comet's fall or an ancient explosion. But until then, the Libyan desert glass stands as it always has, an unanswered question shimmering in the heart of the Sahara. A memory of fire, a jewel of kings, a mystery carved in light. Perhaps, somewhere beneath those dunes, lies the missing crater, the scar of that forgotten impact buried by time. Or perhaps the truth was never meant to be unearthed. For some mysteries, like the desert itself, seem to prefer their silence. The glass remains. The question lingers. Chapter 15. The Ouan Muhugyag. Child deep within the central Sahara, in the desolate expanses of southern Libya, lies a cave called Ouan Muhugyag. A place that, at first glance, seems impossibly barren. The sands stretch endlessly, and the wind whispers through rocky ridges as if it is the only living thing left. Yet beneath this austere silence in 1958, a group of Italian archaeologists made a discovery that would shake the chronology of ancient Africa and the world's understanding of mummification itself. They uncovered a child, not a skeleton, not bones, but the mummified body of a young boy or girl, carefully wrapped in animal hide and laid to rest with deliberate care. Radiocarbon dating would later reveal an astonishing truth. This child had been buried around 5,600 years ago, long before the rise of Egypt's dynasties, centuries before the Great Pyramids were conceived. The discovery forced archaeologists to ask a question that still lingers in the dry air of the Sahara. How could such a sophisticated ritual have existed here, in a land now consumed by desert, so early in human history? The cave itself sits within the Caucasus Mountains, a region once far from desolate. Tens of thousands of years ago, this was not a wasteland but a living landscape, green, fertile, and teeming with life. Rivers cut through savannas, herds of cattle grazed where dunes now rise. The people who lived here were pastoralists, herders who followed the rhythms of rain and migration, whose survival depended on an intimate understanding of their land. And within this land, they left their mark, rock art unlike any other. Painted on the walls of Uan Muhugyag are vivid scenes of life long vanished, hunters wielding bows, dancers moving in rhythmic circles, cattle adorned with markings, and mysterious figures performing what appear to be rituals. These images suggest a people deeply connected to their world, and to forces they believed existed beyond it. So when the archaeologists found the mummified child, the paintings seemed to whisper an answer. This was no accident. This was ceremony. The mummy itself was found in a shallow pit within the cave, wrapped tightly in antelope skin, its body dusted with red ochre, a pigment often associated with life, death, and rebirth across early human cultures. The ochre's presence implies symbolism, perhaps purification, perhaps protection. Under microscopic analysis, the child's skin and internal organs showed deliberate preservation. The body had been eviscerated, the cavity stuffed with organic material, then wrapped carefully before burial. This was not a natural mummification born of climate alone. It was intentional, a process guided by knowledge and ritual. Until this moment, the oldest known mummies came from Egypt, dated to around 3400 BCE, but the Uan Muhugyag child predates them by over a millennium. The implications were profound. It suggested that the art of preserving the dead, and perhaps the belief in an afterlife, did not begin in Egypt. It may have been born deep in the heart of the Sahara. Archaeologist Fabrizio Mori, who led the excavation, described the find with a mixture of awe and confusion. How could people in such an environment possess this level of sophistication? There were no cities here, no temples, no writing, only scattered communities of herders and hunters. Yet they had mastered a funerary science thought to belong to far more advanced civilizations. This realization unsettled the accepted timeline of human development. It hinted that the Sahara was once a cradle of complex ideas, a place where early societies were experimenting with ritual, astronomy, and symbolic art, long before history began to record itself. As the mummy was studied, subtle details began to emerge. The child was around 2.5 years old. The placement of the body, knees drawn toward the chest, head slightly tilted, suggested deliberate positioning, perhaps symbolic of rebirth or return to the womb. Some anthropologists saw echoes of burial practices from other parts of Africa, stretching from Niger to Sudan, where the dead were often laid in similar postures. It was as if these ancient Saharan peoples shared an unspoken theology, that death was not an end, but a transformation. Nearby, fragments of animal bones, stone tools, and hearth remains painted a picture of daily life. Meals cooked beside the cave walls, stories told under flickering firelight. One can almost imagine a small community gathering to perform the child's burial, chants rising into the dark, the scent of smoke and ochre mingling with the desert air. Yet, as profound as the discovery was, it raised more questions than it answered. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And where did they go? The Sahara's climate began to change around 5000 BCE. What was once grassland slowly dried into desert. The rains retreated, the rivers vanished, and with them, the civilizations of the Green Sahara began to fade. Some migrated eastward toward the Nile, bringing with them their knowledge, their cattle, and perhaps their funerary traditions. Could it be that the roots of Egyptian mummification lie not on the banks of the Nile, but in the forgotten heart of the Sahara? It is a possibility that some archaeologists quietly consider, even if few dare to say aloud. For centuries, Egypt has held the world's fascination as the birthplace of civilization, the land of pyramids, pharaohs, and eternal kings. But the mummy of Uwan Muhugiag reminds us that before the Nile kingdoms, there were others, peoples whose names we do not know, whose languages are lost, but whose rituals speak with unmistakable sophistication. Perhaps Egypt did not invent these ideas in isolation. Perhaps it inherited them. The cave paintings strengthen this possibility. Among the figures on Uwan Muhugiag's walls are scenes that resemble ritual processions, with human figures in masks or headdresses, and animals aligned in symbolic patterns. To modernize, they appear almost ceremonial, acts of devotion to unseen forces. Some of the cattle depicted have markings that resemble the sacred cow motifs found later in early Nile Valley cultures. The parallels are haunting. Were these pastoralists the spiritual ancestors of those who later raised temples to Hathor, the cow goddess of fertility and motherhood? If so, then the Uwan Muhugiag child may represent not just a single burial, but a link in a forgotten chain of tradition, stretching from the green plains of ancient Libya to the stone temples of Egypt. Even the cave's geography tells a story. Hidden deep within the Akarkas Mountains, Uwan Muhugiag would have been a sacred place, protected from the elements, echoing with the songs of ancestors. It was not a settlement but a sanctuary, a place chosen with intention. In that dark chamber, surrounded by ancient paintings, the people of the Sahara performed an act of profound tenderness, preserving their child for eternity. That act, quiet, deliberate, filled with love and mystery, stands as one of the earliest known expressions of human spirituality. Today, the child's remains rest not in the cave, but in museum storage, studied and safeguarded. Yet the silence of Uwan Muhugiag still feels heavy with presence. The ochre stains, the faded figures on the walls, they seem to wait for recognition, whispering of a world that thrived before the desert claimed it. The Sahara was not always a graveyard. It was once a garden, and in that garden, people dreamed of eternity. The discovery of the Uwan Muhugiag child reminds us that history is not a straight line, but a broken circle, fragments of memory buried in sand. Civilizations rise, fall, and vanish, but their ideas endure, carried by wind and myth, reappearing in new forms, new lands. Perhaps that is the truest meaning of mummification. Not preservation of the body, but the continuity of memory. Somewhere in that cave, 5,600 years ago, a grieving family placed their child beneath the earth, believing, somehow, that death could be transcended. And in doing so, they left behind a message far greater than they could have known. That life in the Sahara once reached a level of spiritual and artistic depth the world is only beginning to rediscover. And so, the winds still blow through Uwan Muhugiag, carrying dust across an ancient threshold. Somewhere beneath that shifting sand lies the memory of a people who mastered eternity, long before Egypt learned its name. Chapter 16. The Cave of Swimmers. Hidden deep within the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Gilf Kabir Plateau, in Egypt's remote southwest corner near the Libyan border, lies a chamber of ghosts. Its walls are silent now, yet thousands of years ago they rippled with movement, with life, with water, with the rhythm of an ancient world now lost beneath endless dunes. This is the Cave of Swimmers, a place where human hands once painted a memory of the Sahara that no longer exists. Discovered in October 1933 by the Hungarian explorer Laszlo Almasi, the cave first came to the world's attention through his journals, and later through the romanticized retelling of his story in The English Patient. But the truth of the cave is stranger and far older than fiction. Hidden in a maze of sandstone escarpments and wind-carved valleys, its discovery was almost accidental. Almasi and his companions stumbled upon it while mapping the desert, seeking lost oases and forgotten caravan routes. What they found instead was a message from a vanished age, painted in ochre and red across the walls of stone. The images were unmistakable. Human figures, arms outstretched, legs bent in a rhythmic motion that could only mean one thing: swimming. Dozens of them, men and women floating through an unseen current, some alone, others in groups, as if suspended in a watery dance. Around them were animals, gazelles, giraffes and cattle, creatures of the savannah, not the desert. The shock was immediate. Here, in the middle of one of the driest regions on Earth, were scenes of a world where water once flowed freely, where life once thrived. Archaeologists would later date the paintings to around 8,000 years ago, to a period known as the early Holocene, a time when the Sahara was green. It was an age of rains, of lakes, and of rivers that shimmered under a kinder sky. The climate was gentle, the land fertile. Hunters and herders roamed freely across what is now a sea of sand. But as the millennia passed, the monsoons shifted southward, and the land began to wither. The lakes dried, the grasslands turned to dust, and the people, those mysterious artists who painted the swimmers, vanished, leaving behind only this haunting testament to the memory of water. The cave itself is modest in size, a shallow rock shelter, perhaps 10 meters wide and a few meters deep. Yet within that small space lies an entire cosmology. The figures are rendered with astonishing grace, fluid, elegant, almost dreamlike. Their bodies are weightless, as though floating not in water but between worlds. Some scholars have interpreted the imagery literally, as scenes of people swimming in the ancient lakes that once filled the Gilf Kebir. Others see them as symbolic, representing not physical swimming, but a spiritual passage, the journey of the soul through the waters of life and death. In ancient Egyptian mythology, water was more than an element. It was a boundary. The Nile was not just a river. It was the mirror of creation itself. The dead were said to cross watery realms to reach the afterlife. To swim, then, might have meant to traverse that sacred threshold, to move between existence and eternity. Could it be that the people of the Cave of Swimmers already intuited this idea, thousands of years before the pyramids rose? That they painted not a pastime but a rite of passage? The ambiguity is part of the cave's power. Every figure seems to exist in a liminal state, half human, half symbol. There is no clear narrative, no beginning or end. Just motion, eternal and silent. The swimmers do not struggle. They drift, as if surrendering to something greater than themselves. It is this serenity that has captivated every explorer who has stood before them. Yet Almasi himself, the man who brought the cave to modern attention, was more than an explorer. He was a seeker of lost geographies, a man haunted by the possibility that behind these desert sands lay forgotten civilizations. His writings hint at a suspicion that the cave was not merely a record of Neolithic life, but a remnant of something older, a culture whose memory survived in myth. He wrote of the land of Zazura, a fabled oasis of white walls and sleeping kings, said to lie somewhere beyond the dunes. The Cave of Swimmers, in his mind, was a clue, a fragment of that vanished world. Modern archaeology tends to be cautious with such speculation. The prevailing interpretation remains grounded. The paintings were created by early Holocene pastoralists, recording daily life during a wet climatic phase. But even in that pragmatic reading, the awe remains. For these were not primitive markings. They show perspective, proportion, and a profound sense of movement, qualities that suggest a sophisticated aesthetic awareness. Whoever painted them, they were not mere foragers. They were storytellers. Nearby, in other shelters across the Gilf Kebir and Jebel Uweinat regions, similar scenes appear: cattle herders, dancers, hunters, and enigmatic beings with elongated limbs. Together, these sites form a vast prehistoric gallery spanning thousands of square kilometers, a forgotten archive of human expression, carved and painted before writing itself was born. The Cave of Swimmers is but one panel in that immense mural, but it is also a threshold, a point in time when climate, culture, and myth intersected. Around 6,000 years ago, the Green Sahara began its final decline. The rains faltered, the lakes became mudflats. The people who once painted the swimmers likely moved north and east, following the retreating waters. Some may have reached the Nile Valley, bringing with them memories of the lost lakes, and perhaps even the first seeds of Egypt's civilization. The earliest Egyptian cosmologies speak of a primeval water from which all creation arose. Could this be the distant echo of the world remembered in the Cave of Swimmers? Satellite studies and paleoclimatic data have since confirmed what the paintings implied. that the Gilf Kabir once lay at the heart of a vast hydrological network. Beneath the dunes, ancient drainage basins still exist, the ghostly outlines of vanished rivers. In a sense, the swimmers were right. They did live in a world of water, long before it turned to dust. Today, reaching the cave remains a formidable challenge. The journey from the nearest outpost can take days, crossing some of the most desolate terrain on Earth. Sandstorms, shifting dunes, and temperatures exceeding 50 degrees make the site almost unreachable for most. And yet, those who have stood within its sandstone chamber describe a strange stillness, a silence so deep it seems to hum. The figures, though faded by time, still cling to the rock. Their red pigments, made from iron oxide, have endured millennia of erosion and heat, and there they remain, mid-stroke, mid-motion, forever swimming towards something unseen. Perhaps that is why the cave continues to haunt us. It is not merely an archaeological site, but a metaphor for memory itself, for the human impulse to preserve what the world tries to erase. Each swimmer is a gesture against oblivion, a brushstroke of defiance against the desert's slow encroachment. They remind us that even in the face of extinction, humanity creates, and that art, once born, resists death longer than flesh or bone ever could. Some have wondered whether the cave of swimmers might also encode a warning, an ancient awareness of change. For those early artists lived at the cusp of catastrophe. They watched their world dry and crumble, watched the herds disappear, the lakes shrink to salt pans. They must have felt it, the unease of a shifting sky, and still they painted. Was it grief, nostalgia, or a prayer that the waters might someday return? No one knows, and perhaps no one ever will. The desert has reclaimed their world, erasing the lakes, the grass, and even the footsteps that once led here. Yet the images remain, preserved in the dry breath of eternity. Delicate, luminous, and defiant, they are the last ripples of a vanished sea, frozen in stone. In the cave of swimmers, time itself seems suspended, a place where water and sand, life and death, memory and myth all converge. The figures drift on, unbound by gravity or decay, their motion endless, their silence absolute. And as we stand before them, thousands of years later, one can't help but wonder, what did they see in those final days of the Green Sahara? What did they know as the rains failed and the rivers died? Were they swimming through the last waters of their world, or into the first dream of ours? The swimmers do not answer, they only move, forever, beneath the dust of forgotten time. Chapter 17. The Kingdom of Kanem Bornu across the endless horizon of the southern Sahara. Where the sands meet the savannas, lies a basin that once held an inland sea, a vast, shimmering expanse known as Megachad. Today, only Lake Chad remains, a ghost of that ancient ocean. Its waters, receding and advancing through the ages, have borne witness to something extraordinary, the rise and fall of civilizations long before the world would ever hear their names. Among these echoes, one kingdom would endure longer than most, a beacon of power and knowledge in a land where empires came to die. It was called Kanem Bornu, born from the shifting sands of myth and memory. Kanem Bornu emerged around the 8th century CE, but its roots reach far deeper, into the prehistoric cultures that had once gathered along the fertile shores of the vanished Mega Chad. Archaeologists excavating this region have found traces of stone tools, pottery shards, and burial mounds that predate the Kanem Empire by thousands of years. These remnants tell of communities that thrived on the abundance of fish, herds, and trade routes that circled the great inland sea. When the waters receded, they left behind not emptiness, but the bones of a world that would give rise to kingdoms. Kanem's earliest rulers belonged to the Duguwa dynasty, an enigmatic line said to descend from semi-mythic chieftains who governed the nomadic clans of the Sahara's southern rim. Their capital, Njimi, was not merely a city, it was a hub of transformation. Here, desert traders met forest caravans. Here, salt met gold. And here, ideas crossed the invisible boundaries of geography. Some historians have called Kanem Bornu the meeting place of worlds, a bridge between the Mediterranean's ancient order and the deep interior of Africa's hidden kingdoms. The empire's rise was guided by its geography. The Kanem heartland, east of Lake Chad, was both shielded and connected, far enough from coastal invasions, yet central enough to control the trans-Saharan arteries of trade. From the Fezzan and the Garamantes lands to the north, Routes led downward through the desert, carrying salt, cloth, copper, and knowledge. Southward, caravans brought slaves, ivory, and kola nuts. In between flowed the lifeblood of empire, tribute, merchants, and scholars. By the 11th century, a new force swept through Khanum, Islam. The Saifawa dynasty replaced the Dugua line, claiming descent from a hero ancestor named Saif ibn the Yazan, an Arab figure of pre-Islamic legend. Whether this claim was historical or symbolic is unclear, but it marked a turning point. The rulers of Khanum embraced Islam not only as a faith, but as a tool of legitimacy and diplomacy. Their scribes began to record histories in Arabic, their envoys journeyed to Cairo and Mecca, and their realm entered the chronicles of the medieval world. Yet beneath this veneer of recorded history lies something far older, something that hints at a continuity stretching back to forgotten epochs. The architecture of early Khanum sites shows techniques reminiscent of Nok, Tenarian, and even Neolithic Saharan cultures. Mud brick foundations aligned to celestial patterns, circular compounds suggesting ritual observance, and burial customs that mirror practices seen in regions that had been habitable millennia earlier. These clues suggest that Khanum did not simply appear from nowhere, it was the inheritor of a lineage, a civilization born from the memory of lost lakes and vanished green worlds. The empire's prosperity drew strength from movement. Caravans laden with salt and cloth departed from Tripoli, winding their way through the Fezzan oases, then across the Tenere Desert to Khanum's heart. In return, slaves, ostrich feathers, and gold traveled north. This network made Khanum one of the most connected powers of its time, its rulers sitting at the center of a vast web that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Congo forests. But the desert's gifts came with danger. Power here was a mirage. It shimmered and disappeared with the shifting sands. In the 14th century, internal conflict and external pressure broke Khanum's unity. A confederation of nomadic tribes, the Bulala, attacked Njimi, forcing the royal line to flee westward. Across the lake they journeyed, resettling in a new capital, Ngazagamu. Out of exile, a new empire was born, Bornu. This was no mere successor, it was a rebirth. From the ashes of Khanum rose a state more powerful and enduring than before, commanding the plains and trade routes for centuries. The Khanum-Bornu Empire, as it came to be known, was a phoenix in the desert, a civilization that refused to vanish. Under rulers like Mai Idris Aluma in the 16th century, Bornu reached its golden age. Aluma's reign is remembered not just for conquest but for reform. He built roads and fortifications, standardized weights and measures, and maintained diplomatic relations with the Ottoman Empire and North African sultanates. His campaigns extended Bornu's influence across the Sahel, reviving trade and enforcing stability. Chronicles describe him as both warrior and scholar, a man who balanced the sword and the scroll. His court became a meeting ground of cultures, Arab, Berber, Kanuri, and Hausa. But even in Bornu's height, the ghosts of the past lingered. Beneath the cities and caravan routes lay older foundations, settlements long abandoned when the Sahara's climate shifted. Some archaeologists believe that Khanum-Bornu's ancestors may have built upon these forgotten ruins, inheriting fragments of their design and spirit. To this day, pottery styles and linguistic traces in the region echo across millennia, linking prehistoric communities with the medieval empire. The people of Khanum-Bornu may not have remembered the names of those who came before, but their hands still shaped the same clay, followed the same stars, and sang the same songs to the desert wind. As centuries passed, the Sahara grew harsher. The lifelines that once connected Khanum-Bornu to North Africa began to wither. Caravans slowed, rivers shifted, and new powers rose on the coasts. The empire endured, astonishingly, into the 19th century, one of the longest lived in African history. But the sands were closing in. By the time European explorers reached the region, Khanum-Bornu was already a shadow of itself, its rulers diminished, its capital fading back into the earth. Yet even in decline, its memory endured. The Kanuri people, descendants of the empire, still inhabit the lands around Lake Chad. Their language, customs, and oral histories preserve fragments of an age when their ancestors ruled across deserts and savannas, an age when the Sahara was not merely a barrier, but a bridge of civilizations. Modern archaeology continues to unearth pieces of this forgotten grandeur. Ancient trade goods buried beneath dunes, inscriptions etched into stones, and the remains of cities swallowed by dust. Each discovery whispers of continuity, of a thread that connects the prehistoric cultures of the Green Sahara to the medieval courts of Kanem-Bornu. And in those whispers lies a deeper question. Did Kanem-Bornu simply inherit the ruins of an older world, or did it carry forward the flame of civilizations erased by time? The evidence remains ambiguous, half buried beneath centuries of silence. As the sun sets over the golden plains of Chad, the horizon glows with the faint shimmer of what once was. The winds sweep across the desert, erasing footprints yet again. Somewhere beneath the shifting dunes, the story of Kanem-Bornu still sleeps. The last great echo of empire in a land that once dreamed of oceans. And perhaps, in that silence, the Sahara remembers. Chapter 18. The desert fortresses of Mauritania, beneath the endless Saharan sky, where the wind sculpts dunes like drifting waves of time, lie the ancient fortresses of Mauritania, Chinguetti and Ouaddain. From above, they appear as fragile clusters of stone, half swallowed by the desert, suspended between survival and disappearance. Yet within their walls, history once pulsed. Caravans arrived, scholars debated, and manuscripts whispered the memory of worlds long gone. These cities are more than ruins. They are outposts of memory, places where humanity's struggle against oblivion left its mark not in gold or empire, but in the written word, in stone walls resisting the silence of the sand. The city of Chinguetti was founded sometime in the 13th century, though its story reaches far deeper, into the half-light of forgotten epochs. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of pre-Islamic habitation beneath its streets, suggesting that Chinguetti may have risen upon the bones of far older settlements. To the medieval world, it became known as the seventh holy city of Islam, a center of pilgrimage and study at the edge of the known world. But to the desert itself, it was something else, a fortress of endurance, a defiance of time. Chinguetti's streets, narrow and winding, were designed to shelter against the scorching wind. The houses, made of reddish-brown stone bound with mud, seemed to emerge organically from the desert earth, as if they were grown rather than built. At its heart stands the great mosque, its square minaret rising like a stone compass, marking both faith and direction for wandering souls. The minaret's design is older than the city itself, its simplicity reminiscent of ancient Saharan shrines and pre-Islamic enclosures, where form followed survival more than beauty. Yet within those austere walls, something profound flourished. Chinguetti became a city of libraries. Thousands of manuscripts, texts on astronomy, medicine, law, mathematics and philosophy, were written, copied, and preserved in private collections that survive through centuries of wind and sand. Some date as far back as the 11th century, penned in graceful Maghrebi script on gazelle parchment. Many of these manuscripts still rest in ancient chests, guarded by families who trace their lineage to the original scholars. To walk into one of these libraries is to step through a door of time. The air is dry, heavy with dust and parchment. Faded ink lines the pages. Diagrams of stars, treatises on ethics, records of trade, maps of rivers that no longer flow. They tell of a Sahara not yet conquered by sand, when green pastures and caravan routes stretched from Mali to Morocco, connecting sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean world. But the desert, patient and relentless, never forgets its claim. Over centuries, Chinguetti's surrounding lands were swallowed by dunes. Wells dried, routes shifted, traders turned toward the coast, and the city that once glowed with life became a whisper of itself. Yet it did not die. The manuscripts endured, passed from hand to hand like sacred fire, their words outlasting the empires that once funded them. A few hundred kilometers northeast lies Ouaddain, another fortress of stone and memory. It sits on the Adrar Plateau, its houses clinging to steep slopes like echoes of a lost civilization. Founded in the 12th century, Ouaddain was once a key stop on the trans-Saharan trade route, where salt from the mines of Ijil met gold from the south and manuscripts from the east. Here, Berber merchants, Tuareg caravans, and scholars from distant Timbuktu converged in an exchange not only of goods, but of thought. The ruins of Ouaddain tell their story in silence. Walls of dry stone stand half-collapsed. Stairways lead to nowhere, yet even now their layout reveals intelligence, a geometry of survival. Houses built tightly against one another for shade. Corridors are lined with prevailing winds to cool the air, defensive towers that once guarded the treasure of the desert, knowledge. Archaeologists studying these cities have found something remarkable. Beneath medieval foundations lie layers of much older habitation, pottery shards, grinding stones, fragments of hearths, evidence that people lived here thousands of years before Islam reached the desert. These earlier inhabitants were herders and traders, linked to the prehistoric cultures that once roamed the Green Sahara when lakes shimmered where dunes now stand. It suggests a continuity rarely acknowledged, a chain of adaptation stretching from Neolithic pastoralists to Islamic scholars. The same landscapes that once nourished cattle cults and megalith builders later gave rise to centers of scriptural learning. The tools changed, stone idols replaced by sacred texts. But the purpose remained, to preserve meaning in a shifting world. In many ways, Chinguetti and Ouaddaine represent two phases of the same eternal struggle. Both cities clung to the edges of desolation, transforming isolation into sanctuary. Both thrived, not because of the desert's wealth, but despite its hostility. And both ultimately succumbed to the same silent conqueror, entropy, carried on the wind. But within that decline lies a peculiar triumph. The libraries of Chinguetti are still alive. Families such as the Habot and Ould Ahmed families have preserved their manuscripts for centuries, refusing to sell them even as poverty pressed close. They see themselves not as owners, but as custodians of a trust that transcends generations. Each book is a bridge between past and present, between faith and reason, between the living and the dust. One manuscript speaks of earlier cities buried beneath the sand, of ancient settlements whose roofs were seen by the ancestors of our ancestors. Could these be mere legends, or faint memories of a civilization older than the desert itself? Archaeologists working near Chinguetti have uncovered stone alignments and foundations eroded almost to nothing, too ancient to date precisely. They hint at habitation stretching back to the Bronze Age, perhaps beyond. The Sahara guards its secrets with indifference. Winds erase footprints overnight. Dunes migrate and entomb, and what lies beneath becomes part of the myth. Yet in Mauritania, these myths persist in the collective memory. Tales of lost wells, sunken gardens, and cities beneath the dunes. They may seem poetic, but beneath them often lies an archaeological pulse. Faint, but insistent. The libraries themselves are a form of resistance, not against empires, but against forgetting. Within them, ideas that once animated the ancient world continue to circulate long after Europe's dark ages had passed. Scholars in Chinguetti debated the nature of the soul, the motion of the stars, the ethics of power. They copied works by Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ptolemy, preserving lines of thought that might otherwise have been lost to history's tides. And so, these fortresses, of stone and script alike, became monuments not of conquest, but of continuity. Even as the dunes advanced, erasing fields and roads, the words endured. Today, as the desert continues to expand, preservationists fight a new battle. The dry air that once protected the manuscripts now threatens them with brittleness. Windborne sand erodes the walls faster than they can be restored. International projects, such as UNESCO's heritage efforts, aim to digitize the libraries, to ensure that the knowledge written in the heart of the Sahara survives the 21st century. Yet no digital scan can capture the feeling of holding one of those manuscripts, the warmth of leather, the scent of centuries, the faint imprint of hands long gone. They are not just records, they are remnants of breath, of human will carved into fragility. Standing at dusk on the dunes above Chinguetti, one sees the city as it must have always been, a mosaic of stone against the horizon, neither fully alive nor truly dead. The call to prayer echoes softly across the sand, mingling with the hiss of the wind. For a moment, it feels as though the past has not vanished, merely shifted, buried beneath the surface, like the ruins of the older worlds that preceded it. The desert remembers everything, though it speaks in riddles. Chinguetti and Ouaddaine are its verses, carved not in marble or gold, but in endurance. They remind us that civilization is not only measured by what it builds, but by what it strives to remember. Perhaps somewhere beneath the dunes, the earlier cities still sleep, their walls intact, their wells waiting, or perhaps all that remains is the echo of their memory, preserved in the fragile pages of a library, defying the wind. Either way, In the stillness of the Mauritanian night, when the stars blaze over an ocean of sand, it becomes clear the desert may consume, but it never forgets. And so the question lingers, carried by the wind across the dunes. What else lies buried, waiting for the silence to break? Chapter 19. The fossil rivers of the Sahara, beneath the endless sands of the Sahara, beneath dunes that ripple like frozen waves, lies a hidden landscape. A continent within a continent, a memory beneath the desert's silence. Radar and satellite imaging, peering through layers of wind-blown dust, have revealed what no traveler could ever see from the ground. An entire network of vanished rivers, lakes and deltas now buried in oblivion. These are the fossil rivers of the Sahara, ghost waterways that once pulsed with life when this vast desert was green. For most of modern history, the Sahara was thought to have always been what it is now, barren, lifeless, eternal. But the truth buried beneath its dunes tells a very different story. Between 12,000 and 5,000 years ago, during what scientists call the African humid period, or the Green Sahara, monsoon rains swept deep into the continent. The dunes became meadows, the basins became lakes, and great rivers carved their way across what is now the driest expanse on Earth. Among them was one of the mightiest rivers to ever flow through North Africa, the Tamanrasset River. Discovered not by explorers, but by satellites orbiting hundreds of kilometers above, the Tamanrasset was a revelation. In the early 2000s, researchers analyzing radar imagery from the Shuttle Radar Topography mission noticed something extraordinary. A massive channel, hundreds of kilometers long, buried beneath the dunes of Mauritania and Algeria. It stretched northward, connecting the central Sahara to the Atlantic coast and the Mediterranean basin. Had it once flowed, the Tamanrasset would have rivaled the Niger, even the Nile itself. It was not a mere stream, but a continent-spanning artery, wide enough to carry the runoff from the Hoggar Mountains through vast floodplains before emptying into an ancient delta off the coast of Mauritania, now submerged beneath the Atlantic. If such a river once existed, it would have transformed everything we thought we knew about prehistoric Africa. For rivers are not merely waterways, they are lifelines. They bring vegetation, animals, and people. They are the roads of prehistory. During the Green Sahara, this immense network of rivers linked the interior of Africa with the northern coasts, forming corridors of migration and trade that stretched from the heart of the continent to the shores of the Mediterranean. The Tamanrasset system connected with smaller tributaries, the Irhaha, the Tafasasset, the Wadi Sahabi, creating a web of flowing water that bound together what today are isolated deserts and mountains. These rivers were not alone. Satellite scans have revealed dozens of similar channels running beneath the dunes of Libya, Chad, Niger, and Egypt. Each once fed into vast lakes, the ancient megalake Chad, 10 times its modern size, the vanished lake of Fezzan in southern Libya, the immense paleolake of Kufra. Some of these basins still survive as depressions where rare rainfall gathers, hinting at the memory of their greater past. The implications reach beyond geography. They reach into the very story of humanity. Archaeologists now believe these green corridors provided the routes by which early humans moved across North Africa, and perhaps out of Africa itself. Fossil and tool evidence suggests waves of migration during the wet phases of the Sahara, when the land bloomed and animals roamed freely from savanna to shore. The Tamanrasset and its sister rivers may have guided those early wanderers northward, carrying with them not only their tools but their myths, their songs, and their sense of belonging to the land. Imagine it, herds of antelope grazing along riverbanks where now only dunes rise, fishermen casting bone-tipped spears into deep, clear waters, villages along gentle bends of a river that no longer exists. The desert we see today is not a place of death, it is the tomb of a living world. When the monsoons withdrew around 5,000 years ago, the transformation was slow but merciless. Rain stopped falling. The rivers began to shrink, then dry. The lakes retreated into dust. Vegetation withered. What had once been lush became desolate. And yet, the bones of that old world remained. The buried channels, the fossilized floodplains, the hidden deltas, waiting for modern eyes to find them again. In the 1980s, the French geographer Michel Rognon and his team were among the first to suspect the existence of these hidden waterways. By studying sediment patterns and ancient shorelines, they began to piece together the Sahara's lost hydrological map. But it was not until the advent of spaceborne radar that the full picture came into focus. Unlike optical imaging, radar can penetrate dry sand, revealing what lies beneath. The resulting scans exposed long, sinuous features, valleys, tributaries, and deltas, etched deep into the bedrock. When these images were colorized and layered onto modern maps, the Sahara transformed before the scientists' eyes. What seemed like endless desert was revealed to be an ancient river country, sleeping under the dunes. Geologists now estimate that during peak humid periods, up to 10 major river systems crisscross the Sahara. Together, they may have supported hundreds of thousands of people, herds of cattle, and ecosystems now completely erased. But even after the desert's return, the rivers did not vanish entirely. Some still flow in secret, deep beneath the sand. The Nubian Sandstone Aquifer, one of the largest underground water reserves in the world, is thought to be the last remnant of this vanished network. It holds fossil water tens of thousands of years old, liquid time, trapped below ground since the age of the Green Sahara. In Libya and Egypt, wells drilled into this aquifer have brought that ancient water back to the surface, where it irrigates crops under a blazing sun. Yet the more we draw from it, the faster it disappears. The desert remembers, but it does not forgive. The rediscovery of the Sahara's fossil rivers has reshaped not only our understanding of Africa, but of the planet's climate as a whole. It reveals how fragile the balance truly is, how a shift in Earth's orbit, tilting the monsoon north or south by a few degrees, can turn paradise into wasteland. And it suggests something else, that human civilization is not the first to have been shaped and undone by climate change. The people who lived along the Tamanrasset and the Irhahar may have witnessed the slow death of their world, the drying of rivers that once seemed eternal. Perhaps their descendants carried the memory of that loss into myth. The flood stories, the tales of green lands turned to sand. Even today, echoes of those memories survive. Tuareg songs speak of hidden wells and rivers that sleep. In old caravan routes, guides still follow paths that mirror the buried channels mapped by satellites. They did not need radar to know where the rivers once ran. The knowledge was passed down through generations. There is a strange comfort in this. The idea that the desert is not dead, only dreaming, that beneath its silence flows the memory of water. If we could strip away the dunes, the Sahara would appear not as an ocean of sand, but as a mosaic of vanished life, river valleys, lake shores, forests, villages. It would reveal that the desert we see today is merely the latest mask worn by an ever-changing landscape. Some scientists now speculate that the Sahara may one day turn green again. Earth's orbit shifts in cycles, and monsoon patterns will eventually return northward. Perhaps in several thousand years, rains will once again carve through the dunes, reawakening the fossil rivers. The Tamanrasset may flow once more, and the desert will bloom again. But until then, its rivers remain entombed beneath the surface. Ancient veins running through a body of sand. They are the unmarked graves of a vanished world, yet their traces give shape to our understanding of how that world once was. When you stand at the edge of a dune and feel the wind carving its invisible paths, you are standing above those lost rivers. The sand may seem still, but beneath it lies motion, the ghost of water, the memory of time. The Sahara, it seems, has never forgotten. It only waits for us to remember. Chapter 20. The mysterious stone circles of Senegal and Gambia across the western edge of Africa, where the green of the Sahel gives way to the red earth of the savannah, lies one of humanity's most haunting enigmas. Thousands of stone circles, rising in quiet symmetry from the soil, stretch across Senegal and the Gambia, a landscape dotted with megaliths that whisper of lost ancestors and forgotten orders. They are not as famous as Stonehenge, nor as colossal as the pyramids, yet together they form one of the largest collections of megalithic monuments on Earth. More than 1,000 circles, each composed of finely hewn laterite pillars, some weighing several tons, arranged in near-perfect geometry. Their presence, scattered across an area of more than 30,000 square kilometers, tells of a civilization that saw meaning in alignment, symmetry, and the endurance of stone. Archaeologists date these circles to between the 3rd century BCE and the 16th century CE, a span of nearly 2,000 years. Such longevity suggests not a single culture, but a lineage, a long, unbroken tradition carried through generations who, though changing in tongue and custom, maintained an ancient reverence for the circle. The best-known sites, Sinengayen in Senegal and Wasu in the Gambia, stand as guardians of this mystery. At Sinengayen alone, over 1,000 laterite pillars rise from the ground, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. The reddish-brown stones, quarried from nearby hills, were carved with surprising precision. Flat-topped, cylindrical, often arranged in perfect circles of 8, 16, or more. But what were they for? Excavations have revealed burial chambers beneath many circles, containing pottery, iron tools, beads, and human remains. This discovery led scholars to interpret the monuments as necropolises, sacred grounds where the dead were laid to rest in the company of their ancestors. Yet even this explanation feels incomplete. Not all circles contain graves. Some stand empty, as if meant for ceremonies, or perhaps for the living, not the dead. A few researchers have noticed alignments between certain circles and the path of the sun. Could they have been astronomical markers, built to track the solstices, the rains, or the rhythm of agricultural cycles? Others suspect they served as territorial symbols, marking clanlands or ancestral lineages. And still others believe the circles formed part of a ritual landscape, a geography of power that linked communities across the West African plains. Whatever their purpose, the effort required to construct them was immense. Each pillar had to be quarried, shaped, transported, sometimes over great distances, and then raised into place with communal labor. The precision of their layout suggests advanced planning, social organization, and perhaps even an understanding of geometry. And yet the builders left behind no written record. No inscriptions, no diagrams, no chronicles. Only the stones remain, arranged in patterns that seem to echo something both mathematical and spiritual. An order imposed upon the land, a geometry of memory. In this, the circles of Senegal and Gambia resonate with other megalithic traditions across Africa. From the basalt alignments of Namaratunga in Kenya to the sandstone pillars of Tassili, Niger, the continent carries scattered traces of a deep, ancient impulse to shape stone into symbols, to anchor the invisible in the visible. Some scholars have speculated that these West African circles may be descendants of an older Saharan tradition, a memory of the time when the Sahara was not yet a desert, but a green world of lakes and savannas, teeming with people and animals. As the desert expanded, perhaps the descendants of those early pastoralists migrated south and west, carrying with them the knowledge of stone construction, of circles that measured both time and spirit. If so, the megaliths of Senegal and Gambia may represent the westernmost echoes of a civilization long erased by sand and drought, a bridge between the forgotten Sahara and the later kingdoms of the African coast. The stones themselves seem to carry this memory. Their circular form, unbroken, eternal, mirrors the cycles of the sun, the turning of seasons, the continuity of life and death. In African cosmologies, the circle often symbolizes the universe, the ancestors, the community. To stand within one of these ancient rings is to stand at the meeting point between worlds, the living and the dead, the human and the cosmic. At dawn, when the first light spills across the plains of Sinengayen, the shadows of the stones stretch long and silent, tracing invisible lines across the earth. In that moment, it is easy to imagine priests or elders once standing here, marking the movement of the heavens, speaking to their ancestors through the language of the circle. In 2006, UNESCO inscribed the stone circles of Senegambia as a World Heritage Site, recognizing their universal significance. Yet even today, local communities maintain a respectful distance from many of the circles. Some believe the stones are inhabited by spirits, the Pangul, ancestral beings who guard the land. Offerings are still made at certain sites, libations poured, words whispered. The ancient ritual may be broken, but the reverence remains. Scientific excavations continue to uncover new layers of meaning. Carbon dating, stratigraphic analysis, and digital mapping have revealed complex burial customs. Individuals buried in clusters, often accompanied by iron spearheads or ornaments of copper and gold. Such finds hint at societies with intricate social hierarchies, metallurgical skill, and trade networks that reached far beyond the Senegambian plain. Iron, especially, tells a powerful story. The same period that saw the rise of these circles also witnessed the spread of ironworking across West Africa, a technology that reshaped economies, warfare, and spiritual life. In many cultures, ironworkers were considered intermediaries between worlds, their craft a form of sacred transformation, earth into metal, death into memory. Perhaps the circle builders were part of this same spiritual continuum, smiths of stone rather than metal, shaping permanence from impermanence. Even the choice of material seems symbolic. Laterite, rich in iron, glows a deep red when cut and exposed to air. To ancient eyes, its color may have evoked blood, life, or the fiery essence of the earth. To build with it was to root one's lineage in the living body of the land itself, and so, over centuries, stone by stone, circle by circle, these people carved their memory into the soil of West Africa. But like so many ancient monuments, the deeper we study them, the less certain we become. Were these truly the works of isolated local cultures, or the surviving fragments of a vast, interconnected prehistoric network that once spanned the continent? The Sahara's lost civilizations, those of Garamantes, Tifinagh, Tassili, leave traces that seem to ripple outward in every direction. The Senegambian circles might be one of their westernmost echoes, a faint reminder of when the desert's edges were still alive with trade, migration, and myth. When we look upon these circles today, we are not just seeing stones, we are seeing memory, laid out in geometry. A message written not in words, but in form. The wind sighs through the grasses, the red pillars cast their long shadows, and the question remains, who first looked upon this empty land and decided that stone should stand in circles? That symmetry was a way of touching eternity. We may never know their names, or the prayers they spoke as they raised these monoliths, but in the stillness of the Senegambian plains, their vision endures, a harmony of order amid the shifting chaos of time. Perhaps that was their message all along, that while empires rise and fall, while the desert consumes the rivers and the forests retreat, there is something in the human spirit that refuses to vanish, something that insists on being remembered in stone. The circles remain, silent and perfect, waiting for the day their meaning will be understood, or perhaps wisely never will be. The stones endure, the story waits. Chapter 21. The lost gold of the desert empires in the shimmering heart of the Sahara, where dunes rise like frozen waves of time, lies a silence that once concealed one of the world's greatest secrets: gold. For millennia, this vast desert was not a barrier, but a bridge, a golden artery pulsing with trade, faith, and forgotten power. From this barren land, caravans once set forth carrying salt, ivory, and slaves. But above all, they carried the sun's most enduring reflection: gold. Gold shaped kingdoms. It crowned emperors. It forged the fabled wealth of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, the desert empires that shone like mirages between the 11th and 16th centuries. Yet beneath their recorded splendor lies an older, deeper story, one that predates written history and whispers of miners and metallurgists who worked the sands long before kings wore crowns. The medieval chroniclers spoke in awe of Africa's golden cities. The Arab geographer al-Bakri, writing in the 11th century, described Ghana as a land where gold grows in the earth like carrots. Later travelers, like Ibn Battuta and Leo Africanus, would repeat tales of golden dust so abundant it was used to decorate walls, and kings whose thrones gleamed with sunlight itself. To the outside world, these kingdoms seemed like miracles born of the desert. But no miracle endures without roots, and it is within those roots that archaeologists have begun to dig, uncovering traces of something older, more enigmatic. In the rocky uplands of Adra Desi Fogas in modern Mali, and across the ancient river valleys of Niger, fragments of a lost industry lie buried: shafts, tunnels, furnaces, and slag heaps, silent remnants of prehistoric mining. Their age is uncertain. Some date to the early Iron Age, others may stretch back even further, into the murky twilight between prehistory and civilization. Could it be that Africa's golden age was not born in the medieval world, but resurrected from a far more ancient one? In certain sites near Tichit and Tegdaust, archaeologists found ore fragments and crucibles that hint at metallurgical experiments thousands of years before the great empires. The evidence is sparse but persistent. Traces of smelting ovens, carbonized wood from furnaces, and residues that show knowledge of temperature control, the delicate art of separating metal from earth. These early Saharan metallurgists did not work by accident. To extract gold is to command an alchemy of fire, patience, and belief. In a world where metal gleamed like trapped sunlight, to master it was to touch divinity. The miners who once descended into those shafts were not mere laborers. They were ritual specialists, keepers of techniques passed from generation to generation, perhaps descendants of the same desert peoples who once carved cattle into stone, who mummified their dead in caves, who watched the stars to track the rains. The sands of Africa remember their hands, even if history has forgotten their names. When the Sahara began to desiccate, its rivers retreating, its lakes vanishing, many of these early societies migrated southward. They carried with them the memory of the metal-bearing hills and the secrets of fire. And so, as the Green Sahara faded into legend, its knowledge flowed into the river valleys of the Niger and the Senegal, where new centers of civilization emerged. By the time the First Kingdom of Ghana rose around the 8th century CE, the art of finding and refining gold was already ancient. The empire's wealth came from control, not creation, for the goldfields themselves, like Bambouk, Boer, and Wangara, had likely been exploited for centuries before Ghana's kings claimed them. Archaeological surveys in these regions reveal the outlines of old workings, pits descending into the earth, traces of wooden supports, and the blackened remains of smelting fires. The miners who built them left no writing, no monuments, only the quiet geometry of human persistence. But if these mines existed before the empires, who taught their builders? Some researchers point toward prehistoric Saharan cultures, pastoralists who thrived during the humid millennia of the early Holocene. These were the same peoples who painted the cattle cult scenes in the Tassili Naja and buried their dead in ochre near Ouanmuhugiag. Perhaps among them were the first prospectors, drawn to glittering flecks of metal in riverbeds, discovering that under fire's gaze, those flecks could melt, flow, and be reborn as something immortal. In that moment, gold ceased to be a mere mineral. It became a metaphor for the sun, for the soul, for the eternal. When later civilizations rose along the Nile and Niger, they inherited not just the metal, but the myth that gold was the flesh of the gods, and to possess it was to command divine favor. By the time Mansa Musa, ruler of Mali in the 14th century, embarked on his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca, the desert was already an empire of roads. Caravans stretched across 2,000 miles, each bearing hundreds of camels loaded with salt, ivory, and gold. When Musa reached Cairo in 1324, he distributed so much gold that the local economy collapsed for a decade. To the chroniclers of the Islamic world, Mali seemed an isolated miracle of wealth, but beneath its prosperity ran an inheritance, a memory of those forgotten miners and metallurgists who had once coaxed sunlight from stone in the Sahara's ancient hills that gold had outlasted them all. In the sands north of the Niger Bend, explorers have uncovered fragments of ancient furnaces filled with gold-bearing slag. Their design is sophisticated. Bellows chambers for airflow, waste channels to draw away impurities. Such refinement does not appear overnight. It is the culmination of centuries of trial, error, and memory. Could it be that the wealth of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai was not a sudden bloom, but the last harvest of a much older tradition, one that stretched back to the time when the Sahara was still green? This idea unsettles conventional chronology. It suggests that the desert once harbored not merely nomads, but miners, craftsmen, and traders, a metallurgical civilization erased by sand and time. There is another clue, in the myths themselves. Among West African oral traditions, stories speak of golden ancestors, of spirits who dwell beneath the hills, guarding the treasures of the underworld. In some regions, miners still pour libations before digging, invoking these unseen keepers of the earth. Such rituals feel like echoes, faint survivals of beliefs that may stretch back thousands of years, perhaps to those earliest desert artisans who first broke the rock. The ancient miners likely viewed their work as a dialogue with the earth, not conquest, but communion. To release gold was to awaken the sun's essence hidden underground. It was a sacred act, and in that reverence, one hears the heartbeat of a vanished world. a civilization whose wealth was measured not in coins or empires, but in understanding, the knowledge of how to turn stone into light. Today, the old goldfields lie quiet. The desert has swallowed their traces. The wind whispers through the abandoned shafts like a forgotten hymn. Yet satellites have begun to glimpse faint scars across the landscape. Geometric lines, circular depressions, the ghosts of ancient operations long buried. Each discovery hints at an uncomfortable truth: that the Sahara once glittered not only with life, but with industry, and that its supposed emptiness may be a mirage of modern ignorance. Perhaps beneath the dunes of Adrar or the dry basins of Niger still lie the remains of the world's first miners, their furnaces cold, their tools turned to dust, but their legacy blazing on in the gold that once crowned kings. In the end, the lost gold of the desert empires is more than a story of wealth. It is the story of continuity, of knowledge preserved through collapse and migration, of techniques whispered across generations, of a people who refuse to let their light be buried. The gold that dazzled the world in the age of Ghana and Mali may have been only the final glimmer of a civilization far older, one that vanished with the last rains of the Green Sahara. And perhaps, if the sands were to part, we would find not treasure, but testimony, the proof that long before history began, human hands were already reaching into the earth to hold a fragment of the sun. Chapter 22. The Desert Monoliths of Wadi al-Hayatin. The deep silence of southwestern Libya, beyond the reach of roads and reason, lies a valley that once pulsed with life. Today it is known as Wadi al-Hayat, the Valley of Life. Yet the name feels paradoxical, almost cruel, for this is now a kingdom of wind and emptiness. The only signs of endurance are the stone monoliths that rise from the desert floor like ancient guardians, dark against the pale dunes. Their presence is impossible to ignore, towering, immovable, solitary. Each one feels less like a monument and more like a message. But from whom? And to whom? Archaeologists first began documenting these mysterious stones in the mid-20th century during expeditions into the Fezzan region, a vast basin that once formed part of the ancient Saharan lake system. Satellite imagery and desert surveys have since revealed dozens of such monoliths scattered across the valley and its outskirts. Some stand alone, weathered but proud. Others appear in clusters, forming cryptic alignments or silent corridors that stretch toward the horizon. At first glance, they seem natural, the remnants of eroded outcrops shaped by time and sand. But on closer inspection, something unmistakably human reveals itself. Edges flattened by tools, faces marked with engravings, grooves too deliberate to be the work of wind. Some stones bear inscriptions in Tifana, the ancient script of the Tuareg, a writing system whose roots may reach back thousands of years, perhaps to the Proto-Berber cultures that once flourished here. These symbols, carved deep into stone, speak in a tongue that feels both near and unreachable. They whisper of names, directions, blessings, but also of boundaries and belonging. Archaeologists interpret them as territorial markers, signposts along ancient caravan routes that once threaded through the desert. Yet others see something more sacred in their design, the possibility that they were ceremonial monoliths, aligned with burial grounds or seasonal migrations, perhaps even with the stars themselves. The Wadi al-Hayat, after all, has always been a corridor of passage. During the early Holocene, around 8,000 years ago, it was a river valley fed by seasonal rains. Its banks nourished acacia groves, herds of cattle, and scattered settlements. Petroglyphs found in nearby rock shelters show giraffes, elephants, and humans in scenes of abundance, echoes of a green Sahara before desiccation took hold. As the climate shifted and the lakes evaporated, the people adapted. Some turned to herding, others to trade. The valley became a lifeline connecting distant oases. Murzouk to the west, Saba to the east, and further beyond, the fabled routes toward Niger and Chad. It was along these routes that the stone sentinels were placed, perhaps as markers of safe passage, or as sacred intermediaries between travelers and the gods of the desert. To stand before one today is to feel both awe and disquiet. The stones seem almost animate, their surfaces alive with the memory of touch. Faint carvings depict circles, lines, and anthropomorphic forms, figures with outstretched arms, perhaps in worship or offering. Some monoliths appear deliberately oriented towards specific directions, hinting at celestial or ritual significance. Could they have been early forms of desert megaliths, a Saharan counterpart to the standing stones of Europe? The idea is not far-fetched. Across North Africa, from Algeria's Tassili Plateau to the Tibesti Mountains and the Ahaga Range, scattered megalithic structures appear, cairns, tumuli, and upright stones marking graves or ritual sites. Many date to the Neolithic, roughly the same period when the Sahara began its slow death. It was an age when humanity sought permanence in stone, as if to anchor memory against the oncoming tide of erasure. Wadi al-Hayat's monoliths may belong to this same impulse, the desire to fix meaning in a world that was vanishing beneath sand. Yet the question persists, were these stones purely functional, or did they serve a deeper purpose? Some researchers propose that they mark spiritual boundaries, dividing the living world from the realm of ancestors. In several Tuareg traditions, solitary stones in the desert are believed to house spirits, Kel Esuf, people of solitude, who dwell in places untouched by time. To disturb such stones is to invite misfortune. Others see them as beacons, guiding travelers across vast, featureless expanses where direction is easily lost. But then there are the patterns, alignments too consistent to be coincidental. A handful of monoliths appear to trace paths toward ancient water sources, now buried beneath dunes. Others seem to correspond with the rising or setting of certain stars, particularly Sirius and Canopus, celestial markers deeply woven into North African myth. If intentional, such alignments suggest a sophisticated understanding of both geography and astronomy, a kind of desert science, encoded in stone long before maps or compasses. Over the centuries, as civilizations rose and fell along the Mediterranean and Nile, the interior of the Sahara was largely abandoned to silence. The Garamantes, the ancient Saharan kingdom centered not far from Wadi al-Hayat, once built a network of subterranean aqueducts and trading towns that thrived amid the dunes. They too are gone now, leaving behind only ruins and legends. Some scholars wonder if the monoliths predate even them, remnants of an older pastoral culture that laid the foundation upon which the Garamantes later built. One of the most striking stones, found near the modern oasis of Jerma, bears both prehistoric carvings and later Libico-Berber inscriptions, suggesting continuous use over thousands of years. It stands nearly 4 meters high, its surface streaked with desert varnish, a patina formed over millennia. Beneath that varnish, faint geometric motifs hint at forgotten symbologies, concentric circles, serpentine lines, and the outlines of what might be human faces. Each layer tells of a people passing through, leaving their mark before the sand reclaimed their trails. What makes these stones so haunting is not merely their age or scale, but their solitude. Unlike the megalithic complexes of Malta or Stonehenge, Wadi al-Hayat's monoliths are isolated, singular presences amid a sea of emptiness. They do not form temples or enclosures. They stand apart, as if intentionally placed to confront the infinite. Their isolation magnifies their power. To encounter one is to feel small, to sense time not as a line but as an expanse. And still, the desert protects them. Winds shift dunes around their bases but cannot move them. They remain fixed while everything else drifts. Even erosion seems hesitant, as though time itself shows reverence. Some locals speak of them in hushed tones. The Watchers, they call them, stones that see but never speak. In the stillness of Wadi al-Hayat, the air carries a strange presence. At dusk, when the light turns gold and the horizon blurs, the monoliths seem almost to breathe. Their shadows stretch like sundials across the sand, measuring not hours but epochs. One could imagine them as the pillars of an unseen temple, the last architecture of a forgotten faith. Perhaps that is what they are, memorials to continuity, proof that even in desolation, human beings sought connection with the eternal. Modern archaeologists continue to map the valley using drone surveys and LiDAR scans, revealing new stones hidden beneath the dunes. Yet the mystery deepens, not lessens. For every inscription deciphered, another appears that defies translation. The Tifinagh letters, elegant and angular, sometimes form coherent words, names, invocations, prayers. But often they dissolve into abstraction, as if language itself were eroding. It is possible that what survives on these stones is not writing in the modern sense, but ritual geometry, marks made for presence, not for meaning. And so, the stones keep their silence. The wind scours them by day, and the cold stars watch them by night. Each one a sentinel, each one a witness. The people who placed them are gone, their villages buried, their gods unnamed. But their intentions endure, locked in the weight and endurance of stone. Standing before one of these monoliths, it is easy to feel the illusion of permanence, that somehow they will stand forever. Yet even they are fading. Grain by grain, the desert takes back its own. One day the valley may again shift, and the stones may vanish beneath the dunes as they have before. But for now, they remain, guardians of a landscape that once was alive, monuments to a dialogue between humanity and the infinite. And as the wind moves through Wadi al-Hayat, you can almost imagine the voices of those who placed them, whispering across the centuries, carried in the dust. They say nothing that can be written down, only this, remember. Chapter 23. The Silent Oases, echoes of lost cities across the endless sweep of the Sahara, where the dunes roll like frozen waves beneath a merciless sun. There are places where life once refused to yield. Tiny islands of green, shimmering in the heat like mirages, gave birth to communities, kingdoms, and stories. They were called oases, sanctuaries in a sea of desolation. To cross the Sahara was to gamble with death. But for those who knew its secret wells, survival was possible. For those who built their lives around them, these oases were more than rest stops. They were entire worlds. Names like Kufra, Bilma, and Gat whisper through the corridors of desert memory. Each of them, now quiet, was once a vital link in the chain that bound North Africa to the heart of the continent. Caravans of salt and gold, ivory and slaves, knowledge and faith, all passed through their gates. They were the lifelines of the ancient Sahara, pulsing with human movement long before the first camel bell echoed across the dunes. But the story of the oases begins long before recorded history. Beneath the Islamic walls and crumbling caravanserais, archaeologists have unearthed deeper layers, strata of habitation reaching back to the Neolithic, when this same desert was not a wasteland, but a mosaic of lakes, rivers, and grasslands. Stone tools, arrowheads, and ceramics buried beneath the sands tell of early pastoralists and herders who thrived when the Sahara was green. At Bilma, beneath the later salt pits, Neolithic remains have been found. Signs of communities who may have harvested the desert's minerals long before recorded trade began. At Kufra, in southeastern Libya, satellite surveys and limited excavations reveal faint traces of ancient water systems, suggesting human presence thousands of years older than its Islamic foundations. The modern Kufra depression still holds scattered palms and wells, but under its sands may lie the remnants of a prehistoric lake, a forgotten heart that once sustained an ecosystem. Some scientists believe that as the Sahara dried, its retreating waters forced these early peoples to cluster around the shrinking oases, creating the first permanent desert settlements. And then there is Gat, in southwestern Libya, a fortress city nestled among the dark mountains of the Tadrat Akakus, a region famed for its ancient rock art. In nearby caves and cliffs, paintings of giraffes, cattle, and dancing humans depict a Sahara that was once alive, lush, thriving, and filled with rivers. The people who painted these walls may have been ancestors of those who later built Gat's stone fortresses, trading with caravanners who crossed from Fezzan to the Niger basin. The continuity is faint, but visible. The same stones, the same mountain passes, the same impulse to endure in a changing world. These oases were not isolated dots. They formed a network, a web of survival strung across the desert's vast expanse. From the Nile Valley to the Atlantic coast, each oasis was a heartbeat, timed to the rhythm of water. Ancient travelers knew the sequence by heart, from Siwa to Aujila, from Zuwila to Kufra, from Murzuk to Bilma, and onward to Agadez. The routes were as vital as veins, carrying not only goods but culture. Through these pathways passed ideas of astronomy, metallurgy, religion, the silent trade of knowledge that no scribe recorded, but every traveler carried. Yet, as with all life in the Sahara, the balance was fragile. A shift in wind patterns, a fall in groundwater, a changing trade route, any could spell ruin. The very thing that made the oases thrive, their delicate link to underground aquifers, was also their doom. When the water sank beyond reach, the palms withered and the towns died. The desert reclaims slowly, but it never forgets. Sand does not destroy, it buries. Today, when archaeologists dig beneath the dunes of Bilma or Kufra, they find not ruins of conquest, but layers of abandonment, cities slowly deserted as their wells ran dry. Mud brick walls collapse inward, roofs melt into soil, and palms sprout from the courtyards where markets once bustled. Time here behaves differently. A century can pass unnoticed, and a millennium can hide beneath a few feet of sand. The Bilma salt mines, still active today, may be the last visible remnant of an economy that stretches back into prehistory. The slabs of crystalline salt cut from the earth echo the same trade that once made these oases rich. Caravans still pass through, smaller now, their camels following the tracks of ancestors. Every grain of salt carried north recalls the silent generations who first mapped this desert with instinct and memory. And still, beneath these ancient centers, there are deeper mysteries. Some archaeologists propose that the earliest oases were not discovered, but engineered, created through the deliberate tapping of fossil water during the Green Sahara's decline. If true, this would suggest that the peoples of the early Holocene possessed hydrological knowledge far more sophisticated than we assume. The surviving fogaras and kanats, underground irrigation tunnels, found in regions like Fezzan and Air, may be remnants of this forgotten science. The oases, then, were not gifts of nature, but acts of defiance, humanity's final stand against the dying of a once lush world. There are legends, too. The people of Gat speak of vanished settlements beyond the dunes, where the wind sings over buried stones. Tuareg oral tradition tells of cities swallowed overnight. Wells that boiled, palms that turned to ash. To outsiders, these are myths, but to those who live in the Sahara, they are memories. Stories passed down from ancestors who may have watched their own world fade into dust. When European explorers arrived in the 19th century, they described Kufra and Bilma as kingdoms of silence, places of both sanctuary and peril. The heat shimmered above their walls, and every movement seemed slowed by time. But even then the decay had begun. Caravan routes shifted to new centers, empires rose on the coasts. The old way of crossing the desert was ending. The oases, once vibrant, began to fall asleep. Today, many of them still exist, not as thriving cities, but as shadows of survival. The palms remain, but fewer. The wells deeper and saltier. The desert encroaches year by year, as if reclaiming its forgotten children. Yet in this silence something lingers. An afterimage of vitality, a whisper of the civilizations that once drew life from nothing. Satellite imagery now reveals faint outlines of ancient walls and fields buried beneath the sand. In some oases, archaeologists have traced alignments of structures that may predate recorded history by millennia. Hints of urban organization in a landscape thought to be empty. These findings challenge the old view of the Sahara as a barren barrier. Instead, they reveal it as a cradle, a vast and shifting world of adaptation, ingenuity, and loss. Every oasis tells the same story in its own tongue, of abundance, of endurance, of eventual surrender. The desert gives, then takes away, yet the traces endure. A broken well, a scatter of pottery, a grove still clinging to life. Together, they form the Sahara's great paradox, a record of civilizations not erased by war or invasion, but by the quiet, unstoppable march of time. Perhaps, in the soft silence of these oases, there lies a message that even in the harshest of worlds, life will find a way. And when it can no longer endure, it will leave behind the faintest echo, enough for memory to follow. When the wind moves over the dunes of Kufra or Bilma, it carries the same sound it did thousands of years ago. The whisper of palms, the sigh of sand against stone. Somewhere beneath centuries of drift and decay, lie the bones of forgotten cities, still waiting for their stories to be uncovered. And as the desert breathes, you can almost hear them, the echoes of lost worlds, singing softly beneath the sands. Chapter 24. The Sahara's Vanishing Memory. There are places on this earth where silence is so complete, it feels almost alive. And nowhere is that silence deeper than the Sahara, an ocean of sand stretching beyond imagination, shimmering in heat and emptiness. It is the graveyard of forgotten worlds. Yet once, It was green. Once it was alive. Once it was the beating heart of early humanity. When we look upon the Sahara today, we see absence, a void, a wasteland. But beneath its golden skin, beneath the dunes that shift like restless waves, lies a buried memory. The story of how civilization was born, thrived, and then vanished. Satellite imaging has become our new archaeology. From orbit, the desert reveals patterns invisible from the ground. The dry ghosts of ancient riverbeds, the faint scars of long-lost lakes, the outlines of settlements swallowed by sand. NASA's radar scans have traced networks of waterways that once fed green savannas. Beneath the dunes of Libya and Mauritania, vast aquifers still hold the fossil waters of a time when crocodiles and hippos roamed here, and herds of cattle grazed beneath clouds. Thousands of years ago, this landscape was the Sahara in name only. It was a fertile paradise, a world of grasslands, acacia forests, and winding rivers. The people who lived here left their mark in stone. They carved cattle and hunters into the rock, painted spirals and celestial symbols on cave walls. From Tassili in Algeria to the Tadrat Akarkas of Libya, their art speaks of abundance, a vision so different from the desolation we see today that it feels like a dream. But dreams fade. Around 5,000 years ago, the monsoon shifted. The rains that had nourished the Green Sahara began to withdraw. Lakes dried, rivers disappeared, and life retreated with them. What had been a cradle became a tomb. The people followed the vanishing water, some migrating south to the Niger River, others east to the Nile. From that great migration, new cultures arose: Egypt, Nubia, the Sahelian kingdoms. The Sahara did not die, it transformed. Its spirit scattered into new lands, new tongues, new memories, and yet, the desert still remembers. Archaeologists continue to find remnants of those forgotten ages. Megalithic stone circles older than Stonehenge, ceremonial cattle burials, pottery shards painted with patterns that echo across time. In southern Algeria, bones of fish and freshwater shells lie buried in dunes that have not seen water for millennia. In Niger, the lost city of Jado, built of saltstone, stands empty, its towers eroded by centuries of wind. No one remembers who built it or when they left. Every discovery adds another fragment to a vanished mosaic. Yet the full picture refuses to emerge. The Sahara conceals as much as it reveals, and every storm that rises from its heart erases another layer of memory. Oral traditions across North Africa still whisper fragments of the past. Tuareg legends speak of drowned cities and kingdoms consumed by the sands. Berber elders tell of rivers that once flowed where dunes now stand, and of travelers who walked for days upon solid ground where now only shifting emptiness remains. In Mali, ancient griots recite stories of the great north, where ancestors once lived, among stone enclosures that reached toward the sun. Some of these tales sound like echoes of Atlantis, the eternal myth of a civilization swallowed by catastrophe. Yet, unlike the legends of faraway seas, the Sahara's disappearance is written in the earth itself. It was not one city nor one empire that fell, but an entire world. The Sahara's transformation was not sudden, but gradual, a long forgetting written in dust. As the climate dried, the desert expanded outward like an empire of silence. The people who stayed behind built fortresses and wells, adapting to scarcity. They carved routes for caravans that carried salt, gold, and stories across an unforgiving ocean of sand. Chinguetti, Wadan, Timbuktu. These names still shimmer like mirages of continuity. They are the afterimages of the Sahara's memory. But as centuries passed, even these strongholds began to fade. Manuscripts decayed, trade routes shifted, empires rose and fell, leaving the desert untouched, indifferent. And now we stand at a strange crossroad. Technology allows us to peer deeper into the Sahara than ever before. Yet the more we uncover, the more we realize how much has already been lost. Satellite imaging reveals what the wind has buried, but not who these people were, nor how they understood their world. Archaeology gives us bones and pottery, but the thoughts of the builders, their languages, their myths, their prayers, are gone. It is as if the desert absorbed not just their cities, but their voices. In the great silence of the Sahara, even time feels distorted. Dunes migrate like slow tides, swallowing valleys, exposing ruins, then burying them again. A settlement that existed 1,000 years ago may vanish overnight, its walls erased by a single storm. In that sense, the Sahara is not dead. It is alive in motion, a living agent of forgetting. Scientists studying the desert's climate cycles warn that its story is not finished. The Sahara has oscillated between green and arid states for hundreds of thousands of years, driven by subtle shifts in Earth's orbit. It may bloom again long after we are gone. The memory of fertility is written not just in rock art and ruins, but in the DNA of its soil, waiting for the rains to return. And yet, our role in that cycle has changed. Modern climate change, driven by human industry, is altering these rhythms faster than nature ever did. The desert expands southward each year, reclaiming land once cultivated by farmers. In the Sahel, villages are abandoned as the sands advance, history repeating itself in real time. The same pattern that erased ancient civilizations may now be returning, accelerated by our own hands. In a sense, the Sahara's vanishing memory is a mirror, reflecting our own fragility. Civilizations believe they are permanent, yet the desert teaches otherwise. Stone crumbles, cities sink, knowledge, unguarded, turns to dust. The fate of the Sahara is not an ancient tragedy. It is a warning written in sand. Still, the human spirit resists forgetting. Archaeologists, historians, and local guardians are working to recover what the dunes conceal. In Chad, drone mapping has revealed buried settlements the size of small towns. In Mauritania, families guard libraries that have survived for 800 years. In Niger, nomadic elders guide researchers to places their ancestors once camped, tracing invisible routes through the desert's shifting geography. Every act of remembrance is an act of defiance, a refusal to let silence win. But the desert is patient. It does not destroy in rage. It erases in rhythm. Its storms are like the breath of eternity, slow, deliberate, inevitable. And perhaps that is the true lesson of the Sahara, that nothing, not even civilization, is immune to forgetting. At sunset, when the dunes glow red and the air cools into stillness, the desert looks almost holy. Its vastness feels eternal, but that eternity is deceptive. Beneath those dunes lie bones, hearths, cities, and memories, the accumulated weight of 1 million forgotten lives. The Sahara is not a void. It is a library written in sand, its pages turning endlessly beneath the wind. And as the last light fades, one realizes that history is not lost because it was destroyed. It is lost because no one remains to remember. The Sahara is what happens when memory becomes landscape. So the camera drifts upward, high above the dunes, the horizon stretching in gold and shadow. The wind howls like a whisper of time itself. How many worlds, the voice asks softly, must disappear before history begins to remember them?